afternoon, everyone. Is it working? No, it's working? Okay. Welcome everyone to our conference today. It's a real pleasure for us as FEBS, but also Fondation Jean Jaurès and Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, together with the S&D group here in the Parliament, to welcome you so many in the Parliament. My name is Laetitia Thyssen. I'm a policy advisor at FEBS, and I'm here today with my colleague Amandine Clavouillon from Jean Jaurès.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis ravie d'être présente parmi vous au nom de la Fondation Jean Jaurès que je représente, comme Laetitia l'a dit, pour la conférence qui nous réunit aujourd'hui, à la veille de la Journée internationale des droits de la femme, et pour cette conférence qui traitera donc de la régression des droits des femmes en Europe. Pour la Fondation Jean Jaurès, il était naturel d'être partenaire de cette conférence aux côtés de nos partenaires, la FEBS, la Fondation Friedrich Ebert et également le groupe socialiste et démocrate qui nous a apporté tout son soutien. La Fondation Jean Jaurès a toujours mis l'égalité entre les femmes et les hommes au cœur de son action. Nous organisons chaque année des conférences publiques et des séminaires fermés en France, en Europe et dans le monde, sur toutes les thématiques liées à l'égalité, sur toutes les thématiques liées à la défense des droits des femmes, que ce soit l'égalité professionnelle, la parité et la représentation des femmes en politique et au-delà, la lutte contre les violences sexuelles et sexistes, mais aussi la défense pour la santé et les droits sexuels et reproductifs. Tout ceci s'accompagne de publications, d'analyses, de tribunes et d'enquêtes. Là, vous pouvez voir sur les écrans la dernière enquête que nous avons sortie avec la FEBS qui traite des femmes face aux violences sexuelles et au harcèlement dans la rue. Ces travaux ont pour objectif... Okay, but I'm sorry, but I will speak in French. I'm a French organization, so I will speak in French.
No, the interpreters are a bit late, so it's only for now, but they should arrive very soon.
Donc, tous les travaux que nous menons ont pour objectif de contribuer au débat public où on soumet des propositions et des recommandations avec le concours des institutions, mais bien sûr des universitaires, des responsables politiques et syndicaux, et bien entendu des associations féministes françaises et européennes et internationales. À la veille de la Journée internationale des droits des femmes, faire l'état des lieux des avancées en matière des droits des femmes, mais surtout pointer du doigt les reculs en matière de droits des femmes en Europe apparaît fondamental. On le voit bien au sein de l'Union européenne, l'indice d'égalité femmes-hommes montre combien les inégalités sont persistantes au sein des États membres, dans le contexte des montées des populistes et bien sûr de l'élection de gouvernements conservateurs, où on le voit, les droits des femmes sont les premiers menacés et les premiers touchés, en particulier en ce qui concerne les droits sexuels et reproductifs et la lutte contre les violences. En France, nous partageons ces inquiétudes concernant les atteintes qui y sont faites, notamment pour la défense des droits sexuels et reproductifs. Plusieurs exemples en la matière, les propos tenus par le président du syndicat des gynécologues obstétriciens de France, Bertrand de Rochambeau, qui a invoqué sa clause de conscience et qui affirme que l'IVG est un homicide. En effet, la clause de conscience des médecins conduit à rendre difficile l'accès des femmes à l'avortement. Et on l'a vu lors de différents articles dans la presse l'été dernier, où le cas de l'hôpital de Bailleul, qui est situé dans la Sarthe, ne pratique plus l'avortement, et donc conduit les femmes et les oblige à se rendre à plus de 60 km pour se rendre dans des centres hospitaliers à Angers et au Mans. Autre point, on voit la multiplication des attaques contre les moyens de contraception. Et enfin, la structuration du mouvement pro-life Et leur stratégie de communication, où on le voit, ils utilisent la figure, ils en viennent même à utiliser la figure de Simone Veil pour en détourner les propos sur Internet. Donc face à cela, les forces progressistes doivent impérativement se mobiliser, se coordonner pour déployer une stratégie de communication tout aussi efficace dans la société, sur les réseaux sociaux, pour ne pas laisser la place à des discours conservateurs qui en fait, ne plaident en rien pour l'émancipation des femmes. Et donc, à ce titre, et j'en terminerai là, la Fondation Jean Jaurès et la FEPS seront présentes lors de la 63e session de la Commission des droits de la femme à l'ONU. Et donc, nous nous attacherons à défendre fermement les valeurs d'émancipation et d'égalité qui sont des valeurs auxquelles nous croyons profondément. Et donc, voilà, j'ai hâte d'entendre les différentes interventions. Et puis, je vais laisser la parole à ma collègue Laetitia pour la suite. Merci.
Thank you, Amandine. So here we are today as the representatives of our organizations, but also as young women who observe that suddenly women's rights that we thought could be taken for granted are suddenly under serious threat. We see the rise of authoritarian nationalism a bit everywhere in the world, but also in Europe. Some of these countries are in recession, some of those are booming. Others are concerned with the fear of immigrations, others not at all. But what they all share, besides their hostility to liberal democracy, is the fact that they are trying to subordinate women, and that they do not conceive gender equality as something beneficial to society. In order to understand this global Trumpism, we need to remember that, that historically speaking, people have been in relationship that have been forged by a certain social contract, whereby some men are ruling others in return for these men to rule over women. This order has for a long time been considered as something natural as maybe some parents ruling over their children, because this is the structure that is reflected at home. And that is why women empowerment many times is seen as something disruptive of this order. Historically speaking, this is nothing new. Already many years ago, we have seen gender backlashes. Revolutionaries or counter-revolutionaries have used the specter of women power in order to delegitimize the regime in place. And they once they came to power, they decreased women's rights in order to validate their own authority. Take the example of the French Revolution. Marie Antoinette was portrayed as the symbol of the immorality of the Ancien Regime. So once in power, the revolutionaries in France have started decreasing women's rights, such as preventing them from access to a property of lands. They were prevented from senior teaching positions, and so on. And we see similar patterns across history. Now, today, we have Trump, we have Orban, law and justice in Poland, and so on. But all these autocratic leaders are nothing revolutionary. If we come back to present days, examples are not lacking. We see the case in Poland, where the government has been raiding the offices of women's rights organizations in the context of the Black protests. We have Romania, where a referendum has taken place concerning the ban of same-sex marriage, or Hungary, where recently the gender studies faculty has been defunded. However, looking only at Eastern Europe would not draw the full picture. We have Germany, for instance, where doctors are pursued because they are informing people about abortion. We have the Manif pour tous, which has been very strong in France. In Italy, the government is currently supporting measures that would prevent women from accusing their husband of domestic violence if those ones are not convicted, and so on and so on. But I'm going to stop here. So we see that what these leaders are currently doing is that they put into question gender as a way to legitimize themselves. In those times, women's movements are experiencing a lot of trouble. Because, of course, in order to defeat those leaders, we need to increase women's rights. But the more they do so, the more the gender backlash is becoming strong. Fortunately, social media, and the Me Too especially, has provided a useful means in order to overcome the traditional gatekeepers. However, in the long term, what is important to do is not only focus on women empowerment, but about the focus on the normalization of this empowerment. Take the case of Nordic countries, for example. There, women leadership is something completely normal. If you look at the parliaments in Iceland, for instance, you have 48% of women. In Finland and Sweden, they have 44 and 42. It doesn't mean that a Nordic Orban would be impossible, but what it means is that it's much harder for these parties to use gender as an excuse to delegitimize their predecessors. That is why progressive forces really need to own the F word. And here, of course, I mean feminism. They need to do so in the name of freedom of choice, of equal opportunities. This definition is particularly powerful, namely feminism is the radical notion that women are people because it stresses the humanity of women, and that whenever our societies are oppressing women, they take away that humanity. And of course, democracy is not possible without feminism. Feminism is a condition for democracy to take place. That is why we are all gathered today. We decided to organize this conference because we want to address these issues. We want to map and explore what is currently happening, which is going to be discussed in the first panel. And in the second time, we are going to analyze the current trend whilst also providing progressive answers. But before the start of our panel, we are going to have an introductory speech delivered by Agnès Hubert, the president of Gender 5+, but also FEB Scientific Council member, along with Christian Wesker, representative of EIGE, the European Institute for Gender Equality. Thank you, everyone.
Go ahead.
Well, on the program, but I mean, Christian is very sort of gallant. But on the program, you had Christian first and me afterwards. But I mean, I can start. I'll be happy to start so that I won't repeat anything he says. Well, I mean, it's a great occasion, and I thank FEBS for organizing this meeting on the regression of women's rights, right? And let's sort of try and think in gender terms. I've always liked, I mean, Laetitia just mentioned the idea that the gender or feminism was disruptive. I mean, it's a good way of putting it as well. I would say that thinking in gender terms is usually to demystify or to apply a critical view to what is deemed to be the common sense too often, and to show that the king is naked, right? I mean, it's the same way of sort of, I mean, a different way of saying the same thing. I will sort of concentrate on two issues. First of all, they demystify the backlash, right? Or call it backlash, it can be called regression. And in the second part, I will look at sort of some of the tools I can imagine for sort of progressive solutions to the current backlash. So demystify the backlash is what? It's going beyond the evidence and finding the roots of that backlash. Where does it come from? I think it's beyond attacks on democracy, on Europe, and on women's rights, right? And beyond, it means that it comes from an excess of liberalism. Remember that, the one of the first manifestation in Hungary that was sort of theoretically led by Orban was to talk about illiberal democracy. Why? Because there is so much liberalism which has affected people negatively in their daily lives that the question of illiberal democracy or contesting the rules of liberalism started to catch on people's ears and on their votes, basically. And this is the same issue which is going all over Europe with the rise of populist parties, the Gilets jaunes in France in many ways, etc. It takes a lot of different expressions, but it is the same. I think thinking in terms of demystifying the backlash goes as well beyond some of the shocking attacks of Vox, for instance, refusing the budget for the violence against women, or the attacks against Soros or the CU in Hungary, etc. They all express a very strong rejection of women's rights. It is true. But beyond that, it's really cultural liberalism in general which is at stake. So let's make sure that women's rights are respected, but make sure as well that it is part of a larger sort of concept. The third thing on demystify the backlash is, going beyond the sort of simple or what I would call perverse correlations, right? The correlations that are made between the Me Too movement that would be against men. What are we talking about? Are we talking about the real victims, or are we making men victims? So the other thing is as was mentioned by Laetitia as well, the Trump voters. I mean, women would be accused to sort of have too much emancipation and creating the Trump voters, because the Trump voters would have been first and foremost anti-Hillary voters. I mean, no, let's sort of look at the reality. The reality is really a sort of a backlash on women's rights, and men are not the victims. They are the victims of the liberal system just as much as women, and sometimes women are more. Okay, now sort of talking about tools for progressive answers. I like the categorization of the three I's, which means look at ideas, interest, and institutions. If we look at ideas, I think there is a great need to demystify austerity policies in Europe. We need to invest, and that goes through all the sort of, European recent policies. It means we need to invest in the future. We've argued for austerity policies, sort of saying that we could not leave a debt to our children. But, our children are getting disinvested in because education systems are disinvested in, health systems are disinvested in, etc. And we are sort of selling our assets to other powers, like the Piraeus harbor to the Chinese, or airports, or etc. So we've got assets that we must leave to our children, plus we must really turn the European policies to invest much more in the future, which means very much in social education, health policies. We must as well demystify deregulation, which, contrary to what a lot of economists have told us, deregulation was going to sort of save the crisis of unemployment, right? Deregulation has not created employment, I'm sorry, and no economist is coming up sort of with other solutions. But deregulation is not. I mean, regulation is very often a guarantee for those who are the most sort of in the most difficult positions on the labor market. The third idea in fields of idea is parity democracy. The sharing of power and resources between women and men is not a consequence of democracy, it's a condition of democracy. If there is a revision of the EU treaties, we should again sort of try and activate the question of parity democracy, because this is what a sort of healthy democracy is based on, right? Then in terms of interest, the stakeholders, I mean, we've got to reaffirm, it is true, as I was saying right at the beginning, the links between democracy, women's rights, and the European Union. There are allied sort of fights and struggles, and the number of stakeholders for defending women's rights, human rights, should be as large as possible. But in the interest, we've got to make sure that we sort of create more women agencies as well. We finance women's associations, and we make sure that politics, women in politics is not enough, but that we need women who actually defend the interest of women. I don't know if you remember the sentence of Madeleine Albright, which has been used by Donald Tusk recently again in another context, but there is a place in hell for women who do not defend the interest of women or defend other women. And I must say that there is still a lot of women who do not see, probably because they don't want to sort of disrupt the common sense, but who do not see the point of sort of affirming the rights because they feel it's a war against men, when it's not a war against men, it's really a war for women and men. My third point is institutions, and there we need more women in decision-making everywhere, particularly, I mean, we are in the European Union, in European institutions, but as well in governments, parliaments, at national level. And the question of having more women in European institutions is particularly relevant now, as we're going to appoint all the sort of presidents of and sort of the highest level politicians in the European Union. We've got as well to strengthen the institutions that deal with gender equality. Not only have specific services in many places that deal with gender equality, but as well promote the idea of gender mainstreaming and particularly integrate the question of gender budgeting or gender-sensitive budgets. Because if we want to sort of go further, we must make sure that resources are shared equally. So facing the backlash should give more energy rather than sort of discourage people to fight. And the very first step is to vote on the 26th of March and to vote for Democrats, preferably for women, but for people who are ready, men and women, to defend women's rights. And I'm really happy to see so many people, so many young people in this room. Remember that it seems that if young people had been voting at the referendum in the UK when Brexit was decided, we would not be in the mess that we are in at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnes, and I'm sorry for the confusion at the beginning with the timings. Sometimes, is the microphone working? Yeah. Sometimes, for me, it feels like as if the world is a giant, disorienting whirlwind, and things that in the political realities we thought that were unimaginable only 5 years ago are now a reality. There is probably no need for me to give any examples here because you already heard some of them before, and I'm sure every one of you has a set of their own. Amidst all of these changes, where we hear some politicians and some political leaders who are supposed to bring people together, who are supposed to have the message of unity, they are being openly misogynist, homophobic, or racist. And we may find ourselves asking, how did we sleepwalk into all of this? Why did nobody say or do anything about it? So last night, when I was reflecting some of those profound political regressions that have shaken and are still shaking Europe and the greater global community, I remembered when years ago I read the articles published in collection Gender as Symbolic Glue, which many of you, I believe, are familiar with. In the chilling epilogue, Andrea Peto warns us by saying, I hope it's clear that no more time should be wasted in thinking of alternatives by progressive forces. This was published in 2015. 4 years later, we find ourselves in seemingly everlasting, ever faster currents, knowing that some of those achievements in gender equality are still being eroded at alarmingly faster speed. I want to be very clear from the beginning that despite the regression or stagnation in many areas, we also see progress here in Europe and beyond. We see also hope, and I think this is really important for us to have this feeling that there is sort of hopes, that we don't get lost into feeling of that everything is going wrong way. We see hope, for example, also in the United States, when they are readying for the new presidential elections, we see a surge from the progressive left, whose main message of unity should also resonate across political spectrum in Europe. Today here, I will merely scratch the surface on this extensive topic by providing some of the examples of progress, stagnation, and backlash, which I hope that will contribute to the discussions that will take afterwards. And again, another sort of positive story that I would like to start with from my own home country, Estonia, where despite the rise in the anti-equality sentiment, we also have a strong and pro-equality president, Kersti Kaljulaid, and we just elected our parliament, Riigikogu, where previous, or the MEP from the European Parliament member, Kaja Kallas, got the most votes in Estonia. So never before Kersti Kaljulaid we have had a woman president and let alone prime minister. When we talk about situation of women and men in the European Union, one of the tools that EIGE, where I work, has developed and that help us to monitor the progress is the Gender Equality Index. It is very easy to understand for those who don't know. So basically we have the scale from 1 to 100, where 1 is complete gender inequality and 100 is full gender equality. And what we see is that over the decade between 2005 and 2015, there was a marginal progress. So we can say stagnation. It wasn't moving really forward in the EU. And the Union itself remains only halfway towards gender equality. But having said that, I think it's important that here we talk about measurable outcomes. The other, yet the linked story, is the story of regression of women's rights and in public discourse. That's you were speaking very much about it as well previously. Over the years, we have also seen processes that hold the progress back and in many times contribute to the regression. We see that there is less political commitment to gender equality, and many of the important gender equality documents may have been or are not there anymore. We see also that there has been a merger of gender equality bodies with human rights bodies in the national context, but yet these bodies haven't gotten more resources to deal with all of the discrimination grounds. And I'm happy to say also that EGE will release a publication later on this year that is monitoring now the process of those bodies in the member states. So you can expect that sometime in autumn, so institutional mechanisms on gender equality. Strong civil society organizations, of course, are an important indicator to overall health of democracy. Consulting with women's rights and gender equality organizations is one of the prerequisites, as also seen in the Beijing Platform for Action. We, with the Institute, we cooperate strongly with the civil society organizations, European Women's Lobby and Social Platform, and some other networks, and it's something that we hear very often, that the space for the civil society organizations has shrunk and is shrinking, and they feel that at the national levels there is less and less of these consultations taking place. If I can have the next. So what does it all mean? It means that there is overall decrease in funding for gender equality, and its difficulties to track the funds that go for gender equality. Another report that will be coming out very, very shortly is the one on gender budgeting, where we have looked at the EU funds and their expenditure on gender equality. So there will be some of very interesting results where we can see how much of those this funding has been contributing to gender equality goals. But what we can see also that there is a large part of it is gender blind funding, and there haven't been sufficient targets for gender equality. And also that the dual approach to gender equality and gender mainstreaming is disappearing. But how did we get into that situation? Like it was said before already, there is a big imbalance when it comes to power. So one of the things in our index, what we looked at was the power domain, and what we can see is that it's huge differences across Europe. Again, moving towards 100 is moving towards more balance, and towards number 1 is less balance. So it's only really halfway. Can we say that this is the situation where we need to be, or where we want to be? I also believe that while having numerical gender balance in power is not a magic wand, it still contributes to better decisions. And we need to have not just numerical gender balance, but also substantive gender balance. Again, the information how the decisions are making in the national context, we see the huge imbalances there. And I would like to conclude by remembering the words of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau when in 2015, the same year where this collection of articles that I referred to earlier came out, he nominated his cabinet, which was 50-50. And when he was asked, how come you have 50-50 cabinet, meaning 50% women, 50% men, his reply was really quick, because it's 2015. Now in Europe we are in 2019. 4 years have passed since then, and I believe really that we can't really wait any longer, and these elections provide us, all of us, this opportunity to vote with this conscience. Thank you.
So just a very quick technical note. Thanks to the flexibility of the English interpreters, we now have also English interpretation, because there will be some speakers also speaking their native language.
Use it. Is it working? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, so I would kindly ask you to take your seats slowly. We would start the panel, or if you take a coffee, then do it in a silence. Thank you very much for being here. It's an honor for me also to be here. I am Eszter Kovács from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung Budapest, and I have the honor to chair this panel. So let me welcome you also on behalf of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. And on behalf of my colleagues, as I heard, it is taking place in the framework of a youth forum on gender equality. So there are plenty of young people brought here by the Social Democrats to the European Parliament, and we are organizing this event in a big cooperation of Jean Jaurès Foundation, FEPS, and FES, and so everybody. So we are now we have 65 minutes approximately left. So we would like to use that time very well. What this panel is about is rather about mapping. So what is happening in the different countries presented here? We have the ambition that, or we think that if we get to know a bit better what is happening in these 4 countries, it will give us an idea what we are talking about after these general remarks we heard in the introductions. So what we are going to discuss is challenges already presented to us, and we can disentangle what are the similarities and what can be generalized from all these country case studies, or what are only context-specific things, and what is something what is new, what is global about it. So it's very also interesting to see what is old, what is new. Are these movements and campaigns anti-feminist, anti-woman, homophobic? Or are we maybe just not very careful about the overuse of these words? Or how do we try to understand these? And of course, looking at the same time that it is a power struggle, it is a political strategy, but also not to maybe skip the chance or miss the chance to look into ourselves on the progressive side. How did we contribute to this, or what is our share of responsibility, and what can we do better or differently? So I'm very much looking forward to this panel. I will just briefly introduce our panelists like in one sentence. Then I will ask them to have their own speeches, 7 minutes each, to mapping the situation in their countries. Then I will present them a little bit longer. And then I will ask 1 or 2 more questions, or if I see that the audience is very eager to ask, then I will immediately open the floor. And I hope we will have a very exciting discussion before we go to the second panel. So, yes. So we have 4 guests here on the panel now. First one is Lia Migala, to my right, to the left to yours. She's an economist and writer from Italy. She's a member of the board of the International Women's House since 2013. She was associate professor of business economics at La Sapienza University in Rome. And during her professional and research career, she was entrusted with several institutional assignments, mainly in companies, in cultural field, and women concerns on a national and international scale. She's also author of several essays on feminist subjects and fiction. Her most recent novel is Incontri all'angolo di un mattino, Meetings at a Morning Corner, published last year. So she will be the first to speak on the Italian case, but just before she starts, I will say just in one sentence who is with me. Maria Škrabalo, she's here from Croatia, director of Solidarna, the private foundation for human rights and solidarity in Croatia. Zuzana Magyarova, who is a researcher from Bratislava. And Elena Zaharenko, who is from Poland and a political scientist, policy expert in Brussels. So first I ask Lia Migala to speak in Italian. Now we have the translation settled. 7 minutes to tell us about the situation in Italy, in very briefly. Thank you.
Allora, intanto grazie per Grazie per l'invito. Noi come Casa Internazionale delle Donne, che ha sede a Roma, siamo qui per testimoniare quanta regressione sia passata in tempi brevissimi nel nostro Paese e come l'attacco alle donne si manifesti, sia alla base di un processo di, come dice Wendy Brown, di de-democratizzazione, ma anche quanto il movimento delle donne stia lottando sui molti fronti aperti. La particolarità della situazione italiana è data da 2 elementi. Da un lato abbiamo di recente ormai un governo populista e sovranista formato da 2 forze completamente diverse tra di loro, ma che hanno questa ideologia populista e sovranista insieme, e dall'altra un movimento femminista abbastanza forte e soprattutto molto diffuso sul territorio nazionale. In questo senso c'è una particolarità tutta italiana, che è quella che ci ha colpito direttamente quando il Comune di Roma ha cercato di chiudere questa Casa delle Donne, di chiudere questa esperienza. Vi premetto che in Italia le prime case delle donne nascono negli anni 70 con la nascita del movimento femminista, e la Casa Internazionale delle Donne è un'espressione di tutto ciò. è un'espressione talmente importante che perché ci chiamano ormai sia da molte città d'Italia per replicare delle formule, ma addirittura oggi una mia collega del board della casa si trova in Norvegia a spiegare che cos'è la Casa Internazionale delle Donne, proprio perché l'attacco che subiscono queste case è un attacco politico, anche se mascherato da aspetti legalitari. È un attacco all'autonomia e alla cultura delle donne e non semplicemente alla parità tra uomini e donne. A Roma la revoca della Convenzione della Casa Internazionale delle Donne col Comune è stata seguita anche da altre decisioni, come quella di colpire Luce e Siesta, che ha anche un centro antiviolenza, e Donna Lisa, anch'esso un centro antiviolenza. Tutto ciò però ha provocato immediatamente, questo è il contrasto, una reazione forte da parte delle donne, da parte di tutta la città, di tutto il paese. C'è stata una petizione con 100.000 firme, c'è stato assemblee cittadine, e la prima grande manifestazione contro il governo di questo Movimento 5 Stelle a Roma. Tra l'altro noi abbiamo cercato anche l'appoggio e la collaborazione delle grandi istituzioni nazionali e internazionali, e la Commissione FEM di questo Parlamento ci ha ospitate, e poi in una delegazione della Commissione è venuta a Roma e a Napoli proprio per considerare questo attacco specifico, ma anche per l'attacco che invece viviamo di più generalmente in Europa sull'aborto. Devo dire che questi attacchi in Italia ci sono da un po' da sempre, però è vero che c'è un crescendo rossiniano da quando la Lega e il Movimento 5 Stelle sono al governo. Ovviamente il principale attacco all'autonomia delle donne avviene, come in tutta Europa, sulla legge che regola l'interruzione di gravidanza. Una legge che, è bene ricordarlo, in Italia è stata Italia, paese dove la Chiesa Cattolica ha una sua forza specifica, è stata sottoposta a ben 2 referendum che sono stati tutte e 2 volte vinti con la partecipazione massiccia delle donne. Oggi questo attacco prende un'altra forma, e cioè il movimento pro-vita, tutti i movimenti pro-life che sono in tutta Europa, anche con altre sigle, attacca i movimenti delle donne, il movimento LGBT, ha trovato una sua specifica modalità nella richiesta che fanno di far passare nei consigli comunali o regionali delle mozioni che identifichino quel comune o quella regione per la vita. A parte l'assurdo di pensare che possa esistere un comune o una regione contro la vita, è chiaro che questo è un attacco specifico alle donne, perché si cerca di farle passare come delle assassine potenziali. Il nostro ministro della famiglia Fontana non si è vergognato di dire che l'aborto è la prima causa di femminicidio nel mondo, in Italia in particolar modo, benché dimenticandosi che ogni 2 giorni e mezzo viene uccisa una donna per femminicidio. Devo dire che questo assurdo comunque è una mozione che a Verona è stata approvata, a Roma per fortuna siamo riusciti a 2 minutes. Bene, un altro fronte di attacco sulla quale adesso ci stiamo molto battendo è quello lanciato da un altro ministro del governo, che ha presentato un progetto di riforma sulle separazioni, che prevede tali e tali meccanismi per cui alla fine sarà impossibile per le donne chiedere la separazione. Questo vuol dire che si vuole ritornare a un rapporto di subordinazione delle donne, e soprattutto nega che ci sia violenza nelle famiglie e pretende che sia condiviso l'affido tra padri e madri, anche qualora la separazione è motivata da violenza. Inoltre il governo ha lanciato un attacco sui migranti, quindi sono colpite moltissimo le donne, quelle soprattutto soggette alla tratta, perché è stato tolto il permesso di soggiorno per motivi umanitari, e quindi le stanno ricacciando tra le reti criminali. fra pochi giorni, del 29 al 31 marzo, proprio in Italia ci sarà a Verona il famosissimo e famigerato 13° World Congress of Families, che riunisce il movimento globale pro-life. Le donne, anche in questo caso, si sono mobilitate, il movimento non una di meno sta organizzando negli stessi giorni tanti eventi, al centro del quale ci sarà per l'appunto un confronto tra i movimenti femministi internazionali. Quindi, in conclusione, le donne italiane sono in mobilitazione permanente, ma quello che si deve veramente capire è che la nostra è una lotta per la democrazia, per la limitazione dell'ingerenza della legge e della burocratizzazione dei legami personali, e anche, direi, per la crescita di una nuova classe politica in questa nostra Europa che ne ha molto bisogno. Vi dirò poi che se ci sono domande sarò molto lieta di parlare anche di che cosa penso che stia succedendo, cosa c'è dietro tutto questo, e che in realtà le donne devono rimanere assolutamente per mobilitazione permanente perché ne hanno le forze e le capacità, e dall'altra però devono anche cercare sempre alleanze. Sono stata nei 7 minuti. Grazie.
Thank you very much. It was exactly 7 minutes, so thank you. And I am sorry that I have to be so strict on the time, but we want to explore the most of it. Sorry. No, but you should switch it off. Yeah. Okay. Now we are fine. Okay. So thank you very much for your contribution, and we will definitely come back to understand and ask what is behind all this. So, but now we turn to Marina Škrabalo from Croatia, who is the director of Solidarna, Foundation for Human Rights and Solidarity, founded in 2015 as a strategic endeavor of the Croatian human rights community to enhance autonomy and sustainability of human rights activism in light of rising anti-liberal tendencies, with special focus on women's human rights and resilience building. Marina also represents Croatian human rights organizations at the European Economic and Social Committee. She has published on issues related to reproductive rights policy, community mobilization and peace building, EU accession process and its impact on transparency of governance and the role of national parliaments, and good governance in the non-profit and public sector. So a very wide range. Again, you will have 7 minutes to talk about who are the actors and against what concept of gender equality are they mobilizing. Okay, thank you.
So first of all, thank you very much for creating and organizing this event. Thank you all for your attention and interest in how we can all bring our energy and ideals together and resist and take the whole of Europe back on track when it comes to European values, democracy, and respect for every woman, for her dignity and for her autonomy. I will ask our friends if they can project, but I will be not, so this is just like a backdrop with more information, but you can listen to me. Okay. So, the Croatian situation in practice is very similar to the Italian situation. We are also neighbors, just like the situation in Hungary and in other countries in Central and Eastern Europe and in the south of Europe. They resemble each other. What is, how to say, becoming a big issue in Croatia, and why is Croatia at present one of the strongholds of Catholic fundamentalist attacks on women's human rights? Because Croatia is the last member state, as you know. We joined the EU in 2013. And looking at on the slide 2, if we look at what we know from research and a lot of investigative journalist work and monitoring work, especially by Elena, who is one of the leading researchers in this respect in Europe, we know that the networks that the fundamentalists, I call them on purpose, not ultra-conservatives, but we call them religious fundamentalists, because they are trying to impose religious doctrines as public order. And they think, and they claim that it isn't enough to state that something is God-given and that societies should accept it. So they are going directly against the whole of the French Revolution legacy and the whole idea of a society deciding upon in a consensual manner which values we are all going to stand behind and how to create space where we can agree which is inclusive and not exclusive. So religious fundamentalists, Christian fundamentalists are extremely well networked, they're very strategic, and Croatia has been targeted because it is very clear that they have upscaled all of their activities since Croatia's entry to the EU. Which is next slide, thank you, which was very evidenced by the fact that only less than 6 months after Croatia joined the EU, there was a homophobic referendum on heteronormative definition of marriage organized, and our constitution was changed. Since then, we have been under, the whole society has been really, I have to say, bombarded by simultaneous campaigns, you can go on and so on, against education reform, against women's right to choice, against the family law and any kind of liberalization of family relations, against Istanbul Convention ratification, against medically assisted insemination, against sexual and health education, against gay rights, against journalists. So just like human rights defenders, you just name it. There are constant campaigns going on. There is vertical and horizontal infiltration happening, horizontal through professional associations, just like in Italy. There are parallel doctors' associations, Catholic physicians, Catholic educators. The school boards have been infiltrated by parents who are activists of Catholic fundamentalist organizations. They claim to be protecting families, but through this protection they are excluding most of living people in the name of idealized traditionalist concept of family, which is of course 100% patriarchal. So we have all these ugly campaigns, which are of course manipulating with facts and so on. And what has been happening, you can go on, it's okay. So what was the big deal last year? Last year, there was a huge mobilization against ratification of Istanbul Convention, which the government did manage to pass. But the reality today is that, and that was very much held by international para-legal policy lobbying organized by ADF International, with a lot of fake news, also attacking trans rights. This is how they were presenting the dangers. This is their production. So there was also Battle for. There is a lot of organizing. We have a national platform for reproductive rights, which is bringing together different generations of activists and experts. At the same time, there has been a big attack on access to abortion, which is in practice extremely limited due to under-regulated conscientious objection, which is highly tolerated by the system, and hospitals that don't provide the service are not punished. So in the end, what we can conclude is that that what is happening is when you have poor public management, when you have very low social investment in education, health, and social protection services, even when you have infiltration of ultra-conservatives into mainstream political parties, you then have governments that are not capable or not willing to protect their own citizens, primarily women and children, against these attacks that are actually taking toll of lives. Because at the moment, because of lack of government action, we have had a series of most brutal, violent incidents against women, and it's very obvious that our Prime Minister was praised because he managed to ratify, but now there is no implementation. So the big message is we need to connect, we need to monitor what's happening transnationally. We are very enthusiastic about joining forces and coming in solidarity in Verona, and we need to present this attack against women's rights and gender minorities, as I completely agree, as attack against democracy, attack against our values, and it is attack on human security, on our safety, because this is really killing women who are not getting support that they need.
Thank you very much for this enthusiastic and gloomy picture at the same time about Croatia. Our next speaker is Zuzana Magyarova, who is a researcher at the Faculty of Social and Economic Sciences at the Comenius University in Bratislava, and at the same time activist working for the first feminist organization in Slovakia called Aspect. Her work focuses mostly on historical and current political subjectivities of women and gender aspects of political communication. She has been mapping the emergence and development of the gender ideology discourse in Slovakia and its reinforcement with other discourses such as conspiracy, nationalist, anti-EU, and anti-system discourse. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, and thank you so much for an invitation and for organizing this very important event. Well, if we talk about Slovakia, we can see that the issues, as it was already said, are very similar to other countries, and we don't have that much time, so I would like to focus on one very specific thing, and that is what does the success of the discourse attacking women's rights, something that I call the anti-gender ideology discourse, tell us about the state of the civil society in Slovakia, but I assume other countries as well. What we see based on the media presentation and different materials, as well as TV discussions of the actors of this anti-gender ideology discourse, is actually that they are very often position themselves as victims of liberal regime, as victims of witch hunt, and as being at the risk of being cut off financial resources and different resources. So we can see, and now I'm specifically talking because we know that there are different actors. It's not a monolithical movement. We are talking really about different organizations, political parties, the church, many individuals coming from very different backgrounds. So what I'm going to talk about mostly are the organizations that are part of the civil society, non-governmental actors. So this discourse of victimhood is something that is very strong, very present, very often, and what I want to say is that it's actually building on discourse and the critique of the feminist and human rights organizations, something that has been articulated for years, because it is part of the critique of the way how non-governmental organizations are financed, how the priorities actually are being set, and by whom, and the critique that has been going on by feminist and human rights organizations for decades, actually, about the fact that project-led financing is not enough because it's jeopardizing the situation of the civil society, of the NGOs. So it's been going on for such a long time that actually for the states and very often also for the EU institutions, experts coming from non-governmental organizations have become a group of people always complaining about something. And I myself was few times a victim of different events when people talked about or organizers talked about the event itself and the people presenting there, that, you know, like, if in the panel there are people coming from NGOs, you need to be very careful how you are going to moderate the event, because then they are going to complain all the time, over and over again, and we don't get any relevant information. So if this is not the very case of, or if it is not a picture how we actually exploit the knowledge coming from the NGOs, then I'm not really sure what. So this is actually the critique or the discourse coming from the civil society, that these anti-gender ideology actors are actually building on. But the situation between those different groups of organizations is not the same. For example, we see in Slovakia that many of the leading NGOs that are contributing to sharing this notion of gender ideology and gender as something that is very dangerous and anti-democratic are actually funded by the EU funds, or they are getting money from the national funds that are aimed at supporting gender equality. So we see how the feminist organizations and these organizations are sharing the very same resources. One example for all, there is a kind of new project, 2 minutes, great. Kind of new project that was funded by the EU fund that is aimed at creating a national center for family. And we know that we are talking about a very limited notion of family. It's actually supposed to be a network of services and small organizations across the country. So this is something that has been funded by the EU, managed by the state. So the question is how the EU institutions and state institutions are complicit in sharing the anti-gender ideology discourse. And yes, so that's it. And not only because of supporting this different project, but also because of ignoring voice of feminist and human rights organizations, a voice that has been here for years, but has been overlooked and overheard. So this is something very important, because now we are appealing, we look at these organizations, at the civil society, and ask about their strategies, what they have done, and what they are going to do. I think, and I feel this is very important to take this as a whole picture and to look at it in connections. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for bringing in these critical perspectives, and I am sure it is not only relevant for Slovakia. So our last speaker in this first round is Elena Zacharenko from Poland, who is a political scientist and policy expert with several years of experience of influencing EU policy in the area of rights through international non-profit organizations. Her areas of interest include sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender equality, women's rights, and social justice. She authored a study on the anti-choice mobilization in Europe and its influence on EU policymaking, released in 2017. She wrote a chapter on reproductive rights as a social issue in the EU, in the FES volume, The Future of the European Union, Feminist Perspectives from East Central Europe, edited by Eszter Kovács, and available online. And she also co-authored a chapter on women's support to right-wing parties in Poland in the FAS volume Triumph of the Women, the Female Face of the Populists and Far Right in Europe, edited by my colleague Elisa Gucce. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah, thank you very much for this event and this discussion. Just to highlight, contrary to what the program says, I'm here very much, as Esther said, in my own research capacity and not representing IPPF. I wanted to talk about the situation in Poland, and we've been hearing about the regressions and the backlash in other countries, and I think specifically in the case of Poland, this is an aspect that is very well covered in international and European media. And I wanted to broaden the discussion a little bit of the peace government's policies towards women, to also talk about the aspects that are not very often mentioned in this discourse, and which actually, well, they nuance the picture very much. So basically, if we're only looking, especially in the case of Poland, at least if we're only speaking about a backlash on women's rights, this only has a limited explanatory power for what is happening in the country. So I wanted to bring up the other dimension. So apart from the policies that we've all heard of very much, the attempts to restrict the law on abortion, the restriction of access to emergency contraception, policies, educational policies that restrict sexual education in schools, and so on, attacks on women's rights organizations. These are very well publicized occurrences that have been happening over the course of governance of the current government. However, what we don't very often talk about is the elements of socioeconomic policies that the peace government has introduced in the country, which actually very much strengthen at least some majority of women's access to their socioeconomic rights, and they actually address very concrete material needs. So you will also have probably all heard about the direct financial transfer policy that the government has introduced of an extra 500 zloty, so 120 euros a month to each family with 2 or more children, and also from the first child in the case of families in financial difficulty. There's been a strengthening of alimony laws that have actually benefited very much single mothers. Mothers of 4 or more children are now eligible for automatically receiving a state pension, even if they've never worked. There's longer maternity leave for women who have 2 children in quick succession. There's free medicine for pregnant women. We have a lowering of pension age for women, which has been a very welcome policy in society as a whole. There was an overall rise in the minimum wage, which is, again, very important, especially for women, because they tend to be overrepresented in low-paid jobs. We have school benefits for children, and I could go on. I will stop here. You get the point. Now, these policies do not meet, perhaps our liberal feminist definition of what gender interest should be. However, they do advance many women's very concrete, practical, and pragmatic gender needs. They provide the answers and the solutions to the problems they face as a result of the gendered division of labor in society. They provide solutions to care challenges. They provide solutions to supporting the material realities of financially disadvantaged families' lives. And of course, this also reflects the fact that for many women in Poland, in post-transformation Poland, the experience of the workplace has not been emancipatory. So they haven't found, this feminist ideal of going out and getting work and being independent as something that's actually allowed them to realize themselves. For many women, this has actually been a very negative experience because the quality of jobs that are available to them are very low. They're very low paid. They're precarious. They're in the black market, and so on and so on. So what have been the political and economic and social outcomes of the introduction of these policies? Well, actually, the society is very much in favor overall of these policies in Poland. So we have 77% social support for the direct financial transfers. There is still, when we look at predictions for voting behavior broken down by gender for men and women, women are actually slightly more than average likely to vote for peace. So the latest poll showed that it was 36% compared to 32% of men. And this, I would argue, is clearly down to the socio-economic policies that have been presented by this party, and the concrete changes and the improvements they made to the material reality of women's lives. It's the first party in post-1989 Poland that has actually introduced direct financial transfers, that has completely redefined the obligations of the state to the citizen. All of the previous governments have always talked about how we have to catch up with the West. Well, this government came and said, you know what? No, let's benefit from the wealth that we have. Interestingly, we're starting to see this now in the run-up to the European election and the national election later in the year. What has shifted in the Polish political landscape is as a result of the introduction of these policies. It seems that now all of the parties feel obliged to adopt these very strongly socio-economic policies for fear of not winning the election. So there's actually been a shift in that regard. Thank you. I will continue after the questions. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing in these points that the Polish government is not just its anti-gender rhetoric, and it's not only its position on reproductive rights, but all these measures. And you don't have to be for this party to acknowledge that there is something else only going on than the discourse, what is maybe not in our favor, and also maybe it demystifies, or maybe it counters this argument that when populists go to power, then they fail because they cannot govern, or they do not govern. And I think it's I'm saying it also because I come from Hungary. And so thank you very much for bringing in all these aspects. And I think we got a very broad picture, which also proves to me that there is no such thing as an East-West divide on this. So that we in the East sometimes think, oh, we are not developed enough democracies, that's why it can happen. In the West, it's often said, oh, we are too developed, and actually it's just a backlash against our so many achieved, against our so many achievements. And I think this just shows where we are now. So I would, maybe before I open the floor, I would just like to ask one more question. You will have 2 to 3 minutes to answer. And then please think about, I ask the audience to think about very short questions during that time. And so my question to you is now to maybe reflect on what you heard from each other, and maybe what you haven't said on similarities you can recognize by yourself. I mean, we all made the connections, I think, in our hands, but you make it explicit what you see. And or thinking about the social, political, economic reasons and motives behind these setbacks, what you outlined. So it's not just coming from the sky, out of nowhere. Of course, all of you mentioned already elements of this, but you know what can be the driving forces behind these things. So the order will be the same, and 3 minutes for you each. Thank you. So Leah, the floor is yours.
Sì, molte somiglianze, soprattutto anche in Italia in questo momento. Proprio ieri è stato approvato, è iniziato la distribuzione di un reddito di cittadinanza, ed è una norma contro la povertà che certamente ha fatto questo governo, che è un governo misto, ma insomma essenzialmente di destra, ma soprattutto essenzialmente populista e sovranista. Quindi è vero che hanno una presa. Io però penso, e sono molto simili anche le altre osservazioni, per esempio questa questione del finanziamento alle politiche anti-gender e non alle politiche di gender. Per esempio, quando io parlavo dell'importanza delle case, perché le case sono la forma organizzativa dell'autonomia delle donne in Italia, quindi una forma di organizzazione diversa da un partito o da una lobby, perché rivendica l'autonomia. Ebbene, questo tipo di struttura è stata minata appunto partendo dal fatto che non avevamo i finanziamenti per pagare gli affitti onerosi o per pagare tutta l'attività. La nostra casa, per esempio, ha un costo annuo di 600-700 mila euro e noi dobbiamo fare salti mortali per trovarli, quindi è chiaro che avevamo un debito con il comune per l'affitto. Quindi è vero che una delle questioni è rivendicare un finanziamento alle organizzazioni delle donne che lavorano per le donne. Dall'altra voglio dire che questa questione delle donne che accettano, se vogliamo, le politiche anti-gender, dipende anche dal fatto che certamente il femminismo ha messo sicuramente in crisi l'ideologia del maschio bianco che ha il potere, che è anche buono quando difende le donne, eccetera, eccetera, ma è anche violento quando le violenta, per l'appunto. Questa crisi del maschio si è riverberato anche sulle donne, cioè si riverbera come senso di insicurezza per certe situazioni, per le situazioni più fragili e quindi è vero che c'è questo, ma non bisogna dimenticare che molto di questa è ideologia, cioè un'ideologia di un passato e non di un futuro, perché quello che ci troviamo di fronte è un cambiamento epocale, non c'è un passato che ritorna, è una situazione talmente nuova sul campo delle migrazioni, sul campo ecologico, sul campo della crisi del maschile, della denatalità, e tutte queste condizioni richiedono pensieri nuovi, non pensieri vecchi. La destra si presenta con pensieri vecchi, metto i confini perché il confine è una difesa, ma i confini inizialmente, quando sono stati creati, sono stati un momento di creatività, non soltanto di difesa, e quindi bisogna che si pensi al futuro e alle sfide che questo futuro presenta e non si ripensi al passato. Penso che più o meno questo.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so first of all, yes, I would very much agree that this anti-gender movement, which is global movement, makes part of a broader anti-globalization or reactive movements to the globalization that has not brought the ideal that has been propagated. And I would very much agree that chronic lack of social investment is something that can be easily used and instrumentalized to promote policies that are actually re-strengthening, revitalizing patriarchal order. Because you can have social policies that you can support families, and families should be supported, but there are different ways how you can do it. We have the same type of pro-population, pro-demographic subsidies, but at the moment what is happening in Croatia is that we had a series of most brutal, violent incidents against women and children. The last one was that when a guy he threw 4 children out of the window, and 2 of them are almost dead. And that is the guy, they were living on subsidies for families with more children, because it is becoming obvious that people are making money out of having children, because there are also towns in Croatia, small towns that are stimulating childbirth. You can even get up to 7,000 euro for the 4th child. These are really high subsidies. And they go back to the 90s, where Croatia was having this kind of most extreme nationalist episode, where women are always come together, when, the whole kind of proto-fascist ideology always sees women as an object of the nation, that is, the recreating the nation through childbirth. So now these questions through domestic violence that is being completely ignored by institutions and underfinanced, now we are there is space being open to question the real consequences of such superficial demographic renewal policies. So I think that yes, socio-economic policies, looking how they reflect upon gender and human rights policies, this is something that we really need to focus on, and we need to focus on the fact that people feel insecure and they have fear, and because of that they look for stability. And if you have powerful institutions and very active, proactive civil society organizations focused on creating this Catholic cohesion and unity, of course people need safe havens.
Yes, what I would like to say maybe is that in Slovakia, one of the actors that are very active in this anti-gender ideology discourse is actually our government, and the main party are Social Democrats. So we need to be very clear that we are not really talking only about right-wing parties, and that like these actors are very, very diverse, and whatever. I mean, gender can be a tool used for like really various parties and actors coming from very different ideologies and backgrounds. So I think this is something quite specific. Even though, of course, there are many right-wing actors, political parties, and actually some of these right-wing political parties got to the parliament exactly because they used gender ideology as a strategic tool in the election campaign. So this was very important a few years ago, and it really helped them, like all these global movement or global campaigns. What I want to say also, and thank you so much for very good insight into what is going on in Poland, because I would also like to stress that what is very important if we talk about like criticism of like neoliberal policies and different measures, we also need to include, and I'm going back to the presentation, that part of this neoliberal policies is also a weakening of the civil society. So in order to look for different ways how to talk about like the elites and the people and whatever, we need to be very careful what actually we are really talking about, and what is the situation of different people, what are the different ways of precariousness. For instance, if we talk about working conditions and social and economic conditions as well, and then we can maybe see that it's not very clear what kind of elites we usually talk about. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, I think there's really a clear sort of thread running through what we've been talking about, and I stole a phrase from your slides actually. So there's been a Europeanization with regard to social realities and people's fears and sentiments, and I think that this is at least a factor that plays a role in this so-called backlash against gender in our countries in Central and Eastern Europe, at least. I think there's absolutely a role to play by the EU and its institutions that's not really being played in actually taking a very clear position on gender equality and women's rights. And it hails back to the fact that actually EU's policies in this area are very much focused on employment and labor law. This is the origin of gender equality in the EU treaties. They're meant to equalize the working conditions for men and women across the different EU member states to prevent unfair competition by cheaper labor of women in certain member states and not in others. The gender equality measures introduced by the EU are very much focused on labor and market conditions. They're not so much looking at aspects such as reproductive rights and social justice. So this is a weakness that is created this policy gap in the European sphere, which is now being filled by these anti-gender actors very much. I mean, the examples that you gave in Slovakia of gender mainstreaming funds or gender equality funds being used by these organizations, this is the perfect example. I mean, clearly this is, something is lacking in the definition of what these funds are meant to be used for, if this is possible, right?
Thank you very much. It was, again, a very elucidating round, just to bring up 3 or 4 thoughts. What I found especially or particularly inspiring is that that progressive parties didn't deliver on promises, or also the globalization affected different people and different classes differently, and all these insecurities and fears need to be taken seriously, because this can fuel these sentiments that turn these people towards these parties or movements. And also I have to disappoint you, it's not only a Slovak situation, that it's not only right-wing people who are against the gender ideology in Budapest, so in my capital, one of the major mayor candidates of the opposition is all the time against the gender ideology, and he's a fervent opposition to our government. So and also how neoliberal policies interacted with civil society. So it's not just that it started with the right wing, what has happened, and not to mention all the funding issues. So thank you very much for again bringing up new issues. Now is the time to the floor. I ask you to ask questions, and I ask you to be very precise and short, and also say to whom you ask it. So first I take 2-3 questions, and then maybe we will have a round. So maybe okay. So you, and then you and you. Okay, 4 people. Okay, and very briefly. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for some very, very interesting discussions and presentations. I think this is the first time I'm being translated in so many languages, so that's quite cool also. My question goes to Ms. Elena, and it's about a recent report, I think that has come out today or yesterday, which is called the Women in Work Index. And it actually shows that Poland has moved up quite a bit. I think 2 or 3 places. And I think it's very interesting that while in Poland you have a lot of these problems when it comes to reproductive rights and so on, when it comes to women in work, the gender pay gap is quite low compared to other countries and so on. And my idea is that maybe it's because of 500 plus, there's upward pressure or something. And I would like to know your opinion on that.
Okay, let's collect all the questions first. Okay, the lady here somewhere. Who was here? There was here. You were, yeah.
Is it on? Hello, my name is Marina. We represent with my colleague the Social Democratic Party of Ukraine. And I want to ask that question. In Ukraine, officially, we don't have gender inequality. So everything is perfect, and it's set by a constitution, it's set by law. But actually, the things aren't so good, and people see that we have some problem. However, most of us, the vast majority of our people tend to think that feminism it's the war against men, yeah, and it's not something positive, right? And how can we change their perspective? How can we show them that feminism it's not the war against men, but it's the war for men and women, for that democracy and for that ideal society. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First of all, of course, thank you all. You're a big inspiration for all of us, and we have a lot to learn from you. I have a small remark and then my question. My remark is about using the word populism, because I've heard it a couple of times for the last days, and I just want to remark that can we please shy away and stay away from the liberal discourse that is almost elitist, that this is populist politics. No, it's not populist politics, it's a search of fascism. And what we see in Italy and what we see in Brazil is fascism. And we have to call the things how they are in order to be able to fight them, because at the end it's not going to be the liberals, but it's going to be the socialists who are going to fight the fascists when they come back everywhere. And for me, I very much agree with you on how the neoliberal discourse has led to a lot of the backlash that we see today, because also we can see it in our own family that the socialist and democratic parties across Europe who have embraced the neoliberal policies are the same ones that are shattered by the far right, because they have turned away from workers and they have turned away from social politics and fighting for socialist values. And my question is very short. It is to Marina. I hope that I think I can relate most of to what you say, because I'm from Bulgaria, and in Bulgaria, as you know, the Socialist Party is against the gender ideology, and with us the issue is that we do not have the word gender in Bulgarian. It is the same as in Croatia. I saw that you use rod. So we have the same phonetic words to express what gender means. So my question is, now we lost the battle of the Istanbul Convention, as you know, and now in Bulgaria it has come to the point where gender means an LGBTI person. So everybody who is breaking the heteronormative narrative is a gender. So my question that I get asked a lot all the time is, how do we counter this? How do we re-establish, perhaps in some kind of a dialogue with this broken Socialist Party of Bulgaria, and how do we re-establish what gender as a social what gender is? It is a social construct that has to be fought, but first it has to be separated from sex. So yeah, thank you. That's my question.
Thank you very much. The last question here, and then we will sum up here.
Hello, my question is for Marina Scravallo. Sorry if I mispronounce it. This morning in the Interparliamentary Committee of Women's Power in Politics, the president of Croatia was invited, and she did a really nice speech about gender equality and feminism, etc. So I want to know what does she take like real measure for gender equality, or is she more in the side of the Christian fundamentalist? What is her stand on that?
Okay, so I would say that first Elena and Marina are answering the concrete questions, and then you can also answer to the more general ones, and then Susanna and Leah could conclude. Everybody has 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. On the women and work index, yes, I saw that come up in the news. I haven't had the time to look at the actual reports. I was also intrigued, I have to say. So I'm not sure what the report actually measures, if it's the pay gap or if it's sort of income in general. I don't really want to comment too much because I don't know. What I would say is, because you linked it to the 500 plus program, and there have been sort of many also very much on the liberal side, accusations of, oh, you know, this is a program that's going to make women drop out of the labor market, and we're incentivizing women to not be in the workplace but to be at home. I would just like to point out that if you quit your job because the government gives you an extra 120 euros a month, you really have to ask the question, what kind of job was this? How much was it paying? What quality of work you had? And, you know, I wouldn't judge anyone for preferring to take care of their family over working in a job like that. So that's, you know, and if you know, a side effect of this program is actually incentivizing women to have better quality jobs, and, you know, incentivizing the job market to create workplaces that are decent working places, and that are actually, you know, well paid or adequately paid, then I would say this is another very positive outcome, and perhaps this is what we're seeing here.
Okay, so we can definitely have a little chat about our Slavic phonetic approach to gender and how to deal with that in political reality. But yeah, you know what would be my quick fix advice? First, try to reclaim being called, how do they call you? Just gender. You're all gendery. Okay. So, I mean, this is what we did. We had a really successful campaign where when a priest and a theologist said that the contemporary problem of women is that they are disobedient to men because they forget that they are secondary because they were made out of Adam. And we made t-shirts saying, I am secondary, I am disobedient, and I am a slut, because there was another bishop who said that every woman out of the wedlock who had a child was a slut. So you just reclaim it, you do the reclaiming, and you say, yes, gendery are flying around Bulgaria, and they are going to, you just like turn it around. And the second thing, which I absolutely think is the right way to go, especially in such hostile climate, solidarity. Solidarity works. Solidarity always works. And that means support people, women, men in marginalized positions, and then affirm publicly what was going on. During the Istanbul Convention, the whole battle in Croatia, our foundation, which is a community-based foundation we created with 5,000 euro among us, we ran a crowdfunding campaign to collect money to set up a social service of free taxi rides for women who are being treated for cancer. And through that, you can explain what gender is, because it's not the same to live with cancer if you are a woman who has to cook, take care of the family, do all the housework without help. You know, so you go directly to specific life situations, and you practice gender equality and feminism through solidarity. That's what I believe is the most effective way. Thanks. When it comes to our president of Croatia, I also heard that today she had actually she gave an inspiring statement regarding women's power, empowerment, courage, and aspirations. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit ironic. I'll control myself. But the point is that over the last year, she didn't give a single statement on Istanbul Convention. She remained completely silent through massive campaign called Break the Silence, where women came up with hundreds of testimonies of reproductive violence in hospitals, how they were treated, humiliated, and denied access to anesthetics. She keeps silent on all topics that could endanger in any way her rating in opinion polls. Externally, she is all for women's power and equality, very much so in the military, because she used to be the public affairs officer of NATO. But when it comes to Croatian domestic use, she is usually silent.
Maybe comment also.
Okay, so that was a question about how can we show that feminism is not a war against men. Well, then maybe I would think about two ways how to approach this problem. One is in terms of our activities and what we do, and another one is a little bit different. It's about how we talk. The first one is like keep addressing social, economic, and other inequalities in society, because that's our job, whatever problems people usually have with us. So like keep addressing inequalities, because that's what we do. And then another one, I know that this is, there are many myths about feminism, and they will be still there. What maybe we can do a little bit different is that we shouldn't repeat them. I see this very often in Slovakia when, I mean, we have so many discussions about feminism, and usually, or very often, they are structured according to myths about feminisms. So very often we ourselves repeat and reinforce this because we want to, show that it's not true. So I think we should stick to our agenda, and this is what we need to talk about. This is what we need to articulate. This is what we want to bring to the public discourse. So that would be my.
So the concluding remarks for Lia.
Le conclusioni sono un po' complesse. Certo, io sono tra tutti quanti la più anziana, lo dico non per... lo dico perché sono femminista dal 1970, la prima manifestazione femminista a Roma è stata organizzata a casa mia. Perché dico questo? Perché effettivamente questo discorso contro il femminismo ha una storia lunghissima, ma una storia lunghissima che non ha gambe altrettanto lunghe, cioè si ripropone ogni tanto, ma è destinato a non avere alcun successo. Perché? Perché in realtà, come si diceva un tempo, noi combattiamo contro la persona che amiamo, noi amiamo gli uomini anche, no? Cioè, e quindi non è una battaglia per sconfiggerli, ma è una battaglia per crescere. Per crescere come? E qui il discorso sul fatto che bisogna saper sviluppare un discorso, una politica di genere, vedere quali sono il nostro modo diverso di vedere il mondo. Noi non vediamo il mondo secondo una linea di violenza. Perché la nostra casa si chiama Casa Internazionale? Perché da subito abbiamo capito che le donne dovevano essere in rete a livello mondiale e non seguire un percorso settoriale o particolare. Perché noi pensiamo che sia una politica di genere? Perché noi pensiamo che il mondo vada curato, che il mondo debba essere affrontato con un'altra ottica, non l'ottica della guerra, ma l'ottica della pace. Questo mi fa dire anche che la parola fascismo, non perché queste persone non siano fasciste o non siano o non portino avanti anche delle politiche fasciste, però queste politiche sono politiche, quello che dicevo prima, che portano lo sguardo verso il passato, verso l'indietro, non verso l'avanti. Quando io dicevo che ci sono queste grandi nuove sfide che il mondo non ha mai visto, nessuno ha mai pensato 10 anni fa, 20 anni fa, 50 anni fa che il mondo poteva morire, nessuno ha mai pensato che ci sarebbero state migrazioni di questa potenza, che l'Europa sarebbe stata indebolita da se stessa. Cioè, sono veramente cose così nuove, per cui non ha senso utilizzare anche solo il linguaggio antico, bisogna saper guardare avanti. Questo non vuol dire che noi...
Strength and vigor. It so happens that everyone is studying the origins of fascism, the Weimar Republic, but what's difficult is to try to see what's happening with fresh eyes, and I'm not sure that the left wing, I think, does dip into historical categories and does apply labels at a time when I think that the analysis has got to move on, Another issue is people say globalization has caused many of these problems. But it's also opened up borders. And Europe for a long time had been opening up its borders. And I think we've got to open them not just by taking away the custom posts, but a genuine spirit of overtures towards the rest of the world. And I think that instead of closing things off, I'd be much happier if we were opening things up. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's the best closing sentence for this panel that could be pronounced. So now we have approximately 5 minutes break, maybe 7. Just really go quickly to the toilet, take a coffee, go back to your places so that we have a lot of time for the second panel. Thank you. Okay, we were good. I mean, you were good.
You were good as well.
I didn't need to. I will need to be in the next panel, but you were so disciplined. I cannot be like that. You were amazing. Like 7 minutes, everybody was speaking 7 minutes. I have my 7 minutes at least for 20.
The ideal role of the moderator, you know?
Yeah. No, but you were really... Yeah. Okay, yeah, was it okay? Yeah?
So, looking forward to the second panel.
Yeah, me too. Where should I sit? You will be sitting in the middle, I suppose, so I will now move. Tell me where to sit, but I can go somewhere else. Yes, yeah, do that. And I'm not as disciplined as everyone in my panel. Sie waren wahnsinnig gut in diesem Zeithalten. Ja, gut. Das ist... So. War das okay?
Super, ja, das war super.
Weil wir können darauf weiterbauen. Ich glaube, es gibt noch genug Gedanken.
Sehr schön. Das ist dein Glas, ja?
Ja, okay.
Okay.
Okay, Jo. Wow. Diese Frau ist weggegangen, sehr am Anfang.
Ja, Gott sei Dank.
Blauen Haare, der Mann war da, aber die Frau ist weg.
Heute wollen Sie nur kontrollieren, wie weit wir hier gehen.
Aber gerade kamen die super spannenden, selbstkritischen Sachen.
Ja, genau.
Aber
ich glaube,
das wollte sie nicht mehr.
Genau. Unsere suspicious people hier. Ja, ich glaube, wir müssen ein bisschen aufpassen. Nee, aber die sind wieder gegangen. Ich glaube, die
Sie sind jetzt gegangen?
Ja,
die Frau ist gegangen.
Das sollen sie mal bringen, dass sie hier irgendwas dagegen haben. Das wird alles live gestreamt. Ne?
Es wird gut live gestreamt? Ja, es ist live gestreamt.
Ja,
das ist
gar nicht.
Und dann gibt es auch das Video. Echt? Ja. Das wusste ich nicht. Ich dachte, die Leute fragten mich, ob es Livestreaming gibt und ich sagte nö. Und eine Aufnahme? Nö. Gut, aber das wird irgendwo
aufgenommen. Also ich kann
dir
gerne danach schicken.
Und wo ist jetzt das Livestreaming? Wo kann man das verfolgen?
Hast du das auf der FEPS-Website?
FEPS Facebook-Seite? FEPS Website?
Beides.
Wow, das wusste ich gar nicht.
Ach so, ich dachte, du wusstest das.
Nein.
So, dear friends, everybody, may I ask you to please take your seat again and have a coffee or tea with you, please. I'm happy to welcome you now to the second panel.
Is the mic working?
Yeah, it is. Well, for me.
No, because we don't hear anything. So
yeah, I don't
just
know.
Maybe on that side. I mean,
Is the micro working? Can you hear me? Okay. So I'm happy to welcome you on behalf of the S&D group in the European Parliament, co-organizing this event. We will now have another. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, very good. Okay. Welcome everybody to the second panel this afternoon. I'm Stephanie Ricken, political advisor at the S&D Group in the European Parliament, working for the Committee for Gender Equality and Women's Rights. Very welcome to see you here. Most of you are here for 4 days now already, the third day for this youth forum, and I think this is a perfect opportunity to discuss these very important issues. We heard already a lot about possible strategies and solutions, actually, and answers, but I think we can go into depth much more in this. So in this second round now, we will rather look at the answers and solutions that we may be finding, well, in different areas, in policies, in society, also by media. And I would like to welcome our first speaker, which is David Paternotte. He's from the University of Brussels. David actually is Associate Professor in Sociology and Gender Studies at the Université Libre de Bruxelles, where he's also the head of the Atelier Genre et Sexualité. He's the chair of the board of the Specialization Master in Gender Studies, which unites all 6 French-speaking Belgian universities. His publications include the monograph Revendiquer le gay marriage, Belgique, France et Espagne, numerous articles, chapters and volumes, including the book Anti-Gender Campaigns in Europe, and also the special issue, The Feminist Project Under Threat in Europe. He's also co-editor of the series Global Queer Politics. And we would like to hear from you maybe where you see the trends and how you analyze this.
So thanks a lot for the invitations. I will try to be brief, and I'll just mention a few remarks, a few points that have sometimes already been mentioned in the first panel, so I think there are a lot of echoes between what I'm going to say and what has been said. And indeed, I will disappoint the organizers. I'm not going to give you solutions. I think also it's not the job of academics to give solutions. This is the job of activists and politicians. And what we should do as academics is keep asking critical questions and keep asking difficult questions, or keep saying it's more complex and it's more difficult. The other thing I think, and one of the problems also for researchers, is that we work on a moving target. It has been reminded already. It is changing fast. It is spreading even faster. And I think what is frightening is that what we thought was a strong democratic system that could safeguard the democratic liberties is actually collapsing at an extremely rapid pace. And I think there hasn't been much of a response. So I don't expect much from the EU. I was asked, what do you ask from the EU? Well, the EU has shown that it couldn't or didn't want to do anything against Poland or Hungary. So I'm not sure that, I think it's probably too late. And I will, ironical, but I'm so a bit desperate about what can be done. So it's a big question mark. So having said all these negative things, I think the fact of having a moving target is very difficult for researchers, because when we started to work with Esther, among other people, 5 years ago on that topic, we worked a lot about the Catholic Church. That seemed, for instance, to be the big thing, the big elephant in the room at the time. Today, it's just one actor among many actors. And so we need to rethink all the time our theories or approaches or causes, because actually what we thought 5 years ago is no valid anymore, or partially valid. And I think that's difficult for us. It's also difficult for practitioners. And it's one of the reasons why it is very difficult to react to those phenomena. And I just want to mention 6 brief things. And the first thing is, I think we shouldn't use old frames to analyze what's happening. It's not business as usual. It's not just anti-feminism as we used to know. It's not conservative Catholic politics. It's not all these other things. And often in the debate, people use the tools they have. And I think these tools are problematic because they only allow us to see part of the story. So I think we need to invent new tools, and that's not an easy task. The second thing is there is not one single cause, so I think we shouldn't be looking for one big principle that explains everything, and you can call that patriarchy, you can call that neoliberalism, you can call that all sorts of things. Actually, it's a combination of different things. Probably the combination is different in different contexts. What's happening in Sweden has probably not entirely the same causes as what you can see in Poland or in Italy, and still there are commonalities, and that makes our work extremely difficult as well. The third question, I think Florian will speak more about this, is we shouldn't call everything populism. Empirically, we see we have different actors. It has been said already. We have constellations of actors doing different things. So what we need to understand is how these people who sometimes shouldn't be working together actually manage to work together today. Like Catholics and populists normally shouldn't be working together. Still, in some cases, they do. So how is that possible? Also about populism, I think there is a stretching of the concept, the way it is used in even in the academic circles, but even beyond the academic circles, it is stretched in such a way that it means everything and anything, and it's a term which is far too vague to be meaningful today. And it's often a derogatory term, not to you say far right, and sometimes it's like a euphemism that has been said already, or it's a term that is used to say, okay, they're the bad ones, and we the liberals, which, by the way, doesn't mean any space for the socialists, because it's only liberals. So it's really a binary frame, which I think reduces the scope for the left. Third idea, it's not about religion, or not about religion only. It's about sometimes religious organizations, much beyond the Catholic Church, because now we have different sorts of orthodoxies, and we have different sorts of evangelicals playing that story in that game as well. And we have also non-religious actors. So it's about religion when religion is an organized body, but it's not about faith. It's not about atheism against faith, for instance. It's more complex than this. Another idea about what it is not, it's not about left and right. It has been said already by Susanna, among other people. Merkel or Macron are certainly not left, but they do not play in this story. And in Romania or in Ecuador or in other people, this is the left that is pushing the agenda. The first Latin American leader to push gender ideology was Rafael Correa. Extreme left, not even left. So we see it's much more complex again. And the final thing I want to say is we need to be careful with the backlash narrative. And that has been said as well. I mean, the backlash narrative can push us in different ways of thinking. And generally, it's taken for granted. Everyone seems to know what it means, but there is hardly a definition. So if you look, you don't find a definition. And when you try to dig into that, it's often the idea that there is some sort of causality between what we ask for and their reactions. And this is the idea that is the empire striking back on progresses. That idea doesn't work empirically. When you do comparative research, as we have been doing, actually you have even backlash before you get actually progressive asking for something. So it really shows that even if we ask for something else, the answer is ready. And I mean, in many countries you get same-sex marriage. In Italy you have a partnership, that works the same. In some countries there is no reaction against the Istanbul Convention. In some countries you get, as we have heard in Bulgaria, huge reactions. So there is not a clear relation between what is asked and what is given. And I think the problem is, and that will be my final word, it propels us often into some sort of fortress under siege narrative or thinking, and binary thinking. In a sense, we feel attacked, we also feel it's against us, and I think what's happening is obviously partly against some of the progressive agenda, but it's also a much more wider project. And it's not a project against us or against women's rights. It's a project for another understanding of Europe. It's a project for another understanding of democracy in which there is not much space for women's rights.
Thank you very much, David, for pointing out these very complex issues, which even causes, raises even more questions here for us. I would like to give the floor now to Florian Lang, our next speaker. He's a PhD researcher currently at the VUB Political Science Department here in Brussels. And before joining the Evaluation Democratic Governments in Europe research program as a PhD researcher, Florian was a project researcher for the Migration, Diversity and Justice Cluster at the Institute of European Studies. He also worked as a freelance writer for the EU Observer, where he published analytical pieces of far-right populism and democratic backsliding in Europe. And he holds two master's degrees, one in European integration studies from the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and the other one on human rights studies from the University of Vienna. And in his current research, he focuses on mobilization of gender by nationalist, conservative, and far-right populist parties in Europe, and the discursive repertoire used by these parties. So I'm very keen to hear from you. What is your analysis, and also maybe some solutions coming from the media side as well?
So, yeah. That works. Thank you very much for the invitation and the friendly introduction. It's true what David said, like there's going to be a lot of echoing, and not just between the panels, but also between the two of us. And I maybe want to quickly already pick up a point that David made. So quickly, still to my background, I had guess a reverse angle towards how I approach the issue, because I'm for 5 years working on right-wing populism, far-right movements, and so rather recently or identified gender as a highly intriguing and highly relevant aspect in order to understand the rise of right-wing populism. And to quickly already add to it, if people think that populism is the antagonist to liberalism or progressiveness or anything like that, then you fell in the first trap that populists usually pose to yourself, because that is not what populism is about. And that is one of the aspects that is certainly associated to what hinders us to understand that better. But I will go to that a bit later still. So when speaking about the mobilization of gender by right-wing populists or far-right movements in general, I think we can also, taking into account the literature, divide between an ideological and an instrumental component in how they mobilize it. The ideological one is, let's say, the classical one, what we could call a socially conservative nostalgia to a kind of essentialist, naturalistic conception of what gender means, or what traditional gender roles means, or what family means as the core cell of society, and also what follows off of that. Let's say, this anti-gender discourse, that gender studies, feminism tries to dissolve sort of this sense, and is kind of seen as an attack on the family. And that is one part that is probably well known, and I think David and also Esther, they're actually better suited to talk about these issues, because they're working for that already for a very long time, and will rather maybe jumped into the second way. And that is something that we actually haven't heard so far, and I'm a little bit surprised, because we already had the notion of right-wing populism here, and that is that right-wing populists also invoke gender equality itself as a delimitation towards Islam, for example, meaning to say, okay, we as a Western culture have achieved gender equality, and we have an enlightened, superior culture which is under threat by Islam, and that kind of rhetoric has several functions. For example, the first is that it creates a threat scenario that women can identify with. For example, sexual violence, like there are buzzwords for that, the rape refugees, for example, or the invocation of specifically harmful religious practices like forced marriage and those kind of things. And that is something that is very indicative for how populism, as I would call it, as a strategy, and I mean there's a lot of theoretical debate about that in academia, so don't take me too much on terminology because I don't want to get into the full debate on that. But I would consider it rather as a strategy or as a kind of rhetorical toolbox, and that means that like the ideological part, that is, you can see how, I mean, that is also meant with the symbolic glue kind of consideration, that kind of allows right-wing populists, although being actually of a far-right component, to kind of enter mainstream conservatism and form broader coalitions around those issues like reproductive rights and those kind of things. The other form, this instrumental use, that allows them to also connect to actors in society, to progressive actors, and to kind of point out discrepancies in how society works. For example, in that case, when invoking women's rights vis-a-vis Islam. So you can say, okay, you have this eruption between feminists that are maybe very focused on the sexual violence part, and they themselves make themselves thoughts about, okay, what does it mean if there is a large influx of Muslim people, and you can pin them against anti-racist feminists, for example. So that is a way of how polarization is constructed, or the way of how sort of the progressive project is exposed and kind of weakened at the same time. And for that, it's important to understand that populism does not itself entail any real ideological underpinning. It doesn't mean something by itself. What it does, it creates groups, it creates an in-group, it creates an external and an internal out-group, and kind of offers people a basket of scapegoats. And they put, and people always confuse it as that being a simplistic message, and as voters of populist parties or sympathizers would have a simplistic mindset and be anti everything, but it's not true in that sense. What really happens is that they offer this kind of toolbox of scapegoats, and the audience of those populist narratives, they create their worldviews around it. They take their own grievances, whether it's real or perceived grievances, and inequalities, again, whether real or not, and build a worldview around it. And that, in the end, leads to that all different dimensions of inequalities are put against each other. And that results in situations where, for example, somebody has or sympathizes with right-wingers or a right-wing ideology and has a racist mindset, will identify feminism as an enemy, and not because of what feminism stands for or because of what feminists try to do, but for what the feminist identifies itself with, or is assumed to be identified. So, and that is being part of this elite, of this basket of scapegoats. And this is very important to realize, especially if one wants to create policies and measures policies and messages to counter that, because society does not work along one line of inequality. It works along very, very different ones. And that is very much overlooked often in progressive messages, for example, when we speak about very, very specific issues. And I think that is it's a very important point to realize. I mean, one could call that sort of an intersectional approach towards inequalities, because it's life realities of people differ extremely much. For example, you're in a completely different situation if you're a woman with 4 kids in a precarious working situation, or if you are a feminist intellectual in a big city having an extremely high income. And those kind of things, this kind of exposing of discrepancies that we have in progressive messages is a key for populists to mobilize against the whole progressive project, let's say. And that is something that I would say is important to keep in mind. And I will stop here and leave the rest for...
Thank you. Thank you very much, Florian, and also for raising this idea of the scapegoat aspect. I think we can discuss this further on. After having now seen a few more academic and theoretical aspects and trying to analyze the whole picture, I'm hoping we can get some concrete ideas now how we can counter this very unpleasant developments that we all see. So I'm welcoming Catriona Graham. She's a policy and campaigns officer with the European Women's Lobby here in Brussels, where she works on women's sexuality, health, well-being and rights. She's leading the European Women's Lobby work on combating commercial sexual exploitation, and also works with the systematic analysis to end patriarchy and promote intersexual values, including promoting migrant women's rights and girls' rights. She has been working at the Migrant Council of Ireland and the Children's Rights Alliance, and volunteers with Ruhama and for a repeal of the 8th Amendment. So the floor is yours, and please feel free to share with us your work at the European Women's Lobby, but also other ideas that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So after hearing all these different challenges that we are facing in so many different countries, of course it is going to be very easy now to offer one very simple solution to everything. But, you know, we will try. So I think what has been mentioned so far today from so many of our sisters and our colleagues across Europe are really reminiscent of the challenges that our members describe who are working in every European country. The challenge by, however you want to call them, far-right, neoconservative, fundamentalist, populists, where they're no longer calling for a breakup of the European Union, challenging the European Union institutions, but instead trying to infiltrate and get inside and mirror our tactics to shape the future of Europe into their image. Like us, they've recognized that the system is not working and for the people that it's meant to, and they see this as a prime opportunity. They've been very successful in creating an engaging story that is based on fear, hate, division, and scarcity. They are very clear who they are against. They are anti-migrant, they are anti-woman, LGBT, anti-minority. But I think, as was very well described just now, they are never announcing what they are for. There's no singular vision of what the society is that they want to create, other than trying to regress to where we were centuries ago. So what we need to do in challenging this is create a progressive vision that is realistic, is nuanced, it's not overly simplified. We are recognizing that this is a complex, difficult situation that we are facing, but there are solutions, and we need to work hard to realize them in our societies. They are on the defensive because we've been making really strong wins. They've had to invest financially, they've had to formalize, they've had to change their strategies because we have done well in past generations and in past decades. So we need to remember that, and that a lot of the challenges we are facing are because they've recognized this need to act. So we need to reclaim this vision, we need to reclaim the progress that we have made, and we need to remain singular and not be distracted by this backlash and keep fighting for progress. We need to have a vision that's inspiring so that we can work together at all levels to create a new system. This vision must be one where leaders are truly representative and inclusive of those they are working for. It must put care at its centre so that we are no longer working in a society based around economics, but instead putting people and our well-being at the core of what changes we are making. We need to tackle poverty, inequality, discrimination as a core part of our purpose. We need to invest resources and increase our efforts to prevent catastrophic climate change and recognise the interconnectedness of these issues. We need a new form of leadership which is based on empathy, humility, authenticity, compassion. We need to make sure that women are respected, included, and can live their lives free from violence and the fear of violence. Consent must be enthusiastic, free from power or coercion, and freely given. And we must make sure that people's rights are upheld. We need to create this vision, but really look at what actions need to be taken to realise this. Remember that we have power. We have power together for action. We can see this in many different countries who are actively campaigning together, creating movements, grassroots action. We can see in Ireland the strength of the campaign, which involved all different parts of society, in creating a massive referendum result that nobody could have expected how strong it was, and it shows the power when we work together. We look at Poland and how millions of women came together to mobilise against regressive strategies and attacks on reproductive rights. The current movement of young people all across Europe who are coming together to fight against climate change and call on those older people who are in power to make action and change happen. And the Me Too movement, which was a huge international dynamic shift, and we can see now the results of that when we start to talk about sexual violence. As we speak up, as we recognise that we do not accept the things that are happening to us, we do not accept a normalization of sexual violence in our societies, we have change. We need to act and recognise that women and people of colour are seriously underrepresented in political spaces, that 7 women are murdered daily across Europe as a result of male violence, that 9 million girls across Europe face harassment online before they turn 15, that our media and our publicity does not equally represent women and men's voices, and that we face a pension gap between women and men of 40%. But through action, through leadership, political quotas, ratification of the Istanbul Convention, the adoption of a care guarantee, working on gender budgeting, bringing humanitarian focus to our migration policies to end the unnecessary torture and death of asylum seekers and migrants as a result of European policies, and resourcing our social movements adequately, we can show that a feminist Europe is the way forward. We can recognise that while voters currently are people who are coming from traditional power structures and might be swayed by these regressive movements because they can hold and retain their power, if we can bring more people into our movements, bring more people into having political strength, include more voters in our movements, mobilise the public, that's how we can really bring social shift, become a more inclusive movement, and keep collaborating together. It takes significant work, but nobody ever said the revolution would be easy. So we are doing it. Change can come. The time is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catriona. Very promising, actually, encouraging, and we will discuss this further later on in the debate. Then I would like to give the floor now to Esther Kovac. Esther Kovac holds a bachelor in sociology and a master in French and German studies and in political science. Since 2016, she is a PhD student in the political science at ELTE University Budapest, working at the right-wing mobilization against political correctness and gender ideology in a global context in connection with the developments within progressive movements. She has been working with the Hungarian office of the German political foundation Friedrich Ebert Stiftung since 2009. And since then, 2012, she is responsible for the foundation's gender program for East and Central Europe. And there she has been editing several volumes, all available online. In 2015, she co-edited the volume Gender as Symbolic Glue, the Position and Role of Conservative and Far-Right Parties in the Anti-Gender Mobilization in Europe. And in 2016, the volume Solidarity and Struggle, Feminist Perspectives on Neoliberalism in Central Eastern Europe. So the floor is, yeah, you might mention this later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How much time do I have?
You have 7
minutes. Oh, okay. Okay, I have 6 or 7 points. It depends. So I would start with giving a gender definition of what I use, and then I will tell why I'm saying that. What I think gender is, or how I use it, is that the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for women and men. This is the gender definition of the Istanbul Convention, and I think it is important to clarify, because this is not the only gender definition progressive actors use. So it's not only the right wing that thinks that if you are LGBTI, then you are a gender. I teach feminist social theory at the university, and at the first class I ask the students, what do you think gender is? And among the first answers they say, well, the gender you identify with. And this is a completely different definition. It's an identity-based individual definition than the one which is an analytical one to describe roles, but doesn't question that a woman is an adult female. So I'm just saying this because it makes our work also more complicated, and there are also contradictions among us on the progressive side. It is also very difficult. I would like to connect to David, who also said it's a moving target, and it's very difficult to analyze because it is happening right now. And when I say right now, it is right now. This morning in the Hungarian propaganda press, what is how to say, basically this is the way how the government communicates with us. Yes, it's not journalism. An article appeared, an editorial, basically without an author, that we demand that Fidesz party quits the European People's Party. And then this is and said that the European People's Party is not conservative anymore, but it is as liberal as the liberals, and destroys national, European, and gender identities. So it is basically part of our everyday language and everyday political struggles. But in the Hungarian context, when they attack gender studies, when they attack Istanbul Convention, it is always linked to trans and genderqueer definitions of gender and activist claims. I know it is not overgeneralizable to every country, but in the Hungarian case, this is what they use mainly. But if we analyze the attacks against gender in the Hungarian context, we tend to overemphasize the importance that, they are attacking a critical concept of gender, but it is embedded in a much bigger struggle. As you know, the Hungarian government is reconstructing and redefining the terms of liberal democracy, or how they want to see it. So Orbán already announced a huge policy against culture and against science. And this is one element of that. So we should see it all in the bigger framework. I would say it for Hungary, and I think in many cases it is one element, and it's very difficult to separate from others. With Weronika Grzebalska, I authored a paper which is online available with the title Beyond Anti-Women Backlash. And basically we are trying to disentangle these concepts, what we have already discussed in the first panel, and David was also mentioning that we should be very careful with these labels, also with the old concepts, but also with labelings, labels like misogynist. We overuse that, and anti-feminist. And it is, firstly, it is analytically not very precise, but it is also sometimes that we tend to mix up electorates with the anti-gender actors, or the parties. So in Hungary, 49% of my country people voted for the ruling party, 20% voted for the far right at the last elections. I have very big difficulties to call 70% of my population as misogynist. They are not. So there is, and of course they get angry if the liberals just go around with labels like that. And we are recreating also a lot of taboos with this. If, for instance, in what Elena was just saying in the last panel, she listed all the things what the government was doing in favor of women in pragmatic sense. I could do that for Hungary too. I get regularly that, it means you want to vote for Fidesz. It means you are for the party. So basically, there is this liberal consensus that wants itself to be kept and creates those taboos. So just because we are attacked, it doesn't mean that we are beyond criticism and that we should not address things. So I think we should look at this demand side. I mean, it is, of course, it's not a short-term strategy, or you cannot make a policy out of it immediately. But that really, in the Hungarian case, we always say, okay, now we have time, so we will not change it in the near future. So now maybe we can afford thinking. And what is the demand side for this? So are these conservative attitudes, reminders from Middle Ages? There, so what feeds this? And parts of them were already mentioned by the others, like the way how we or the progressive forces imagine gender equality maybe don't always fit the realities of the people. So we conducted a research on women's situation in Hungary last year, and it's for the overwhelming majority work at the labor market has nothing to do with emancipation. The working conditions and the pay is so demeaning. We really need to understand those people who want to escape the labor market, or for whom it's doesn't mean anything. But also, I think what we need to look at also inequalities in Europe. So when we take labor market participation as an indicator of gender equality, then, for instance, in Germany or in Austria, the labor market participation of women is much higher than in Hungary. But on which price? That they manage to outsource care work to Eastern European women. It's not against Germany. There is a huge crisis in Germany, but or in Great Britain or in Austria. But wide masses of Ukrainian, Czechs, and Hungarians go to these countries. So then there is a rainbow. Yes.
It means hope.
Maybe I should stop at this point, but I cannot. So I think we need to look at this, and also not to think about this as Hungary is lagging behind and Germany or Great Britain is the great forward. Okay, 2 more minutes. Okay, cool. One more point maybe I would like to address, I mean it's a very difficult one and it's just very briefly, is that there are certain tendencies within the progressive activism that could also be criticized. I would just call one thing, what I would call individualized intersectionality. This is my own concept. And basically the idea that when we want to address multiple forms of oppression like patriarchy or racism, that in certain activisms people are equated with their positionalities. That me as a cis, white, middle class, able-bodied woman, what can I say, what can I not say? There is an overuse of this and labelings of people, which is not helpful for dialogue. So we also might look at critically on ourselves or on this. So when everybody asks why do people vote for Fidesz, for instance, then we should also ask who should they vote for. So there is a huge problem with alternatives and a huge problem with representation, how the opposition parties and where the Hungarian society is. So again, this is a point to discuss among ourselves if we want to understand why these parties are so strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Esther, for this very self-critical view, of course, and provocative thesis. So maybe this can be discussed later on. I would just like, I know that it is very difficult, but I would still like to come back with a very concrete question to you, the speakers of the panel, but also to the audience, because I know there are very intelligent people here in the room and demanding people as well. If we look at the concrete solutions or strategies that you can think of, what do you think, or can you please share with us your ideas what your expectations are actually concerning politicians. We are here in the European Parliament. We will have elections very soon. Well, we are organizing this on behalf of the S&D group, of course, among others. So the different roles that we could take, for instance, on behalf of the political field, but also academic, civil society. I would ask you just to look at this maybe for the next for 2 minutes, the speakers, but also ask you from the audience. Of course, you're welcome to come up with your comments, your questions, and suggestions. What from the Parliament? The question was, what would you expect concretely from politics, and also from civil society, also from media, maybe? Media plays a very important role here, as we heard. It's all interlinked, and what can we do in these areas?
So, as I said, I don't have a magical solution, otherwise I wouldn't be here and I would make a lot of money, because that would be very much asked. I mean, two ideas, I think. One thing is, and the second one connects to this parliament concretely. One thing is, I think we need to go back into the grassroots and we need to go back into the communities. Populists can win because we haven't been there. And we haven't explained what we should be doing, and we should sometimes get out of our comfort zone and go back into the arena. That's one thing. The second thing, and that some people might call that populism, Florian might come back to that maybe. The second thing that is important, I think, and that's for academics, is share what we know, is what I'm doing a lot at this moment, instead of working on other things and publishing as I should be doing. And the second thing is also watching, monitoring people. Example of monitoring, it has been, people have talked about the World Congress of Families, where you may know that the president of this parliament was announced as one of the main keynote speakers to this event. And apparently it's because of me, because I shared information with someone. Activists started to contact MEPs, and it's how MEPs contacted the president of this parliament saying, well, that's not okay, you shouldn't be there. And now he has disappeared from the program. So I will be there with other people. We'll see whether he's still there or whether he's actually disappeared.
Thank you very much. And it's true that we had a very good cooperation on that. Actually, I hope we have been successful until the end. Would you like to?
Yeah, in general, like what you mentioned with the media, and I'm working a lot on social media, and I can safely say that I spend more time in the abyss that is social media than any sane person should do, and it is definitely true that social media, and we heard it in the very beginning when thinking of something like Me Too, that it is not necessarily possible without something like that, the type of mobilization and awareness raising. Briefly to Me Too, I would like to add that Me Too started a long time before, and it became popular when rich white people got interested into it. So that is already like a link to what I want to say about social media, because what is important are two things. The first thing is that social media are an industry. It's an attention industry. It's not something that the government or the world government gave benevolently to us as a discursive space. So, and that means that also activism, as much from the right or the left or progressive or liberal, works in that attention cycle. So it is not a medium where people inform each other and debate something out, but it's a medium where we mark our own identities and where we rage against other people. So what is really lost, and I know it's a big criticism against like the fourth wave feminism, so to speak. To get like this constant loop of rage and moving on to the next rage without actually never really saying what do we want and what needs to be done. And I think social media in general is just not a very suitable medium for that. So we should not put too much our hopes in that, because in playing that medium, let's say the enemy is much more savvy and much more, it fits much more to their style and what they try to do. And when it comes to the political, I mean, you mentioned that kind of thing, you know, like that's, we sit here in the parliament and we think, what can the parliament do? What can the EU do? But this very same people, they're sitting in here, they're working these floors. So what are we actually talking about? So we can of course, I mean, the parliament does many great things, and we have this discussion rounds. We have the FEM committee that does a great work. But then in the end, who controls the EU? It's nation states, and there we're nationalists and autocrats have a say in what is happening. So I don't see how that can be bridged, because all those kind of things, the stories that we tell, those things that is something that exists for years and years and years, and nothing has really come out of it. So why would it change now? And most certainly you can pin it into every kind of political direction. I mean, to say like, okay, it's like the neoliberal system and kind of the neoliberal consensus that avoids that. But in the end, it really requires a fracture with something, and not this camp making between, okay, we have the pro-European camp, or we have the progressive camp and the not progressive camp, because that's just reinforcing those kind of polarizations, and it leads in the end to nothing if there is not a real majority or a real policy way to really fight for that.
Thank you very much, Florian. So, Katrina, please.
Thank you. So I think before coming into some concrete examples of steps that can be taken, I'd mention a few principles that I think we need to reflect on. I completely agree that we need to go back to grassroots campaigning, working in local communities, and drawing the connections between people who are at the front lines, working in streets, working in local communities, with national level governments and international level working. We need to make sure that the progressive solutions that we're coming up with at a European level are ones that will actually have an impact for people on the ground, that will be felt and realised. A good example of that is, even while it sounds like it should be the most boring thing ever, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. That's something that everyone across Europe, I think, has had to come into contact with. So something like this, it shows the impact that Europe can have on people's lives, but we need to get more ambitious when it comes to social justice issues and not just about regulation of data. So we can go farther and use those kind of examples to see the kind of change that we can make. We need to talk about how we communicate around political issues. So we have these really complicated situations, but we need to be able to make them something that we can grasp. So again, as we start to make this shift in politics, that it's about real solutions, not politicians saying, I will give you the sun, moon, earth and stars, because we know that feeds the idea that you can have unrealistic aspirations. Instead, how can we shift back towards, this is what we can actually do that will actually work and actually make change? I think paired with that, to make sure that we can still win people over in voting, we need to have a different type of education when it comes to politics. We need to have an education system that promotes critical thinking and analysis, and not just data rote learning, and one that really engages people so that they can really work with political systems, know how they work, and analyse more closely what politicians are saying, so that as you get these populist messages, you can really see actually what do they mean. And I know immediately I don't have to have somebody support me through a process of analysing it, but I can see the problems there. And finally, accountability. I think we need to look at the institutions and the systems, end impunity for people who try to undermine those systems and how democratic processes should work, and really make sure that we're communicating that we recognise there are issues with our European institutions, we recognise there are issues with our political systems, and actually make progress, be brave about that, and say we will change them and work on that openly. When you talk about solutions, so we have our manifesto campaign for the European elections. A nice little chance to plug it. So it's called 50-50 Women for Europe, Europe for Women, and we set out a number of different policy recommendations under our key theme areas of work that are both aimed at the European institutions and at member states. It has things like quotas, that we need to really come back to having an institutional strategy for equality between women and men, which we ran out of a few years ago and a new one hasn't been brought in. We need codes of conduct that set out the kind of activities that are expected and the kind of principles that we expect our leaders to adhere to. We can see that trust in institutions is grossly undermined when you hear examples like the level of sexual violence being perpetrated by UN staff members and the Me Too in the EU institutions. So these kind of problems really undermine the trust as we're trying to strengthen it and promote it. So again, coming out with real solutions to that. The ratification and implementation of the Istanbul Convention to combat violence against women, and bringing in real legislative directives around combating violence, realising the directive on combating trafficking in human beings, having a directive around combating sexual exploitation. So going going past having resolutions and motions of support, but really actually driving change and implementing action. Reforming our migration policies, looking at the kind of conditions that people are being expected to live in these temporary asylum centres, and really moving for complete reform of how we approach migration. Gender mainstreaming in the multi-annual financial framework, which is the framework that all of the European budgets work under, making sure that women are resourced, that we actually name explicitly women and girls in ring-fenced funding, because when we know it's included as a general principle, it's not prioritised and we don't see funds going where they need to go. And then finally, looking at how we can work with private institutions. So we talk about the media. How can we set up guidelines for best practice? When we're looking at the massive tech companies, how can we work with them on regulation towards trying to find a feminist European internet space and ending the kind of innocence that they can come back to, where they say we don't hold third parties to account for the kind of content they host on their sites, but actually really driving for change there too.
Thank you very much. Very good inputs we can discuss. So there are clearly ideas and strategies.
Yes, I would like first to mention the role of the media on that sense that this fight for the clicks distorts many things, and they are that is the reason why they are so sensationalist and tabloidist, and also very eager to set up debates with pro-contra positions, and it's, I think, very much limiting our space. I mean, I have no influence on that. It's just that it is one of the conditions among which we try to differentiate the debate. And so what I think is the most important for us, and I would say for politics and for NGOs or civil society alike, is this overcoming these false dichotomies of populists versus liberals, and search wherever we can more differentiation, and also that not to label those who don't agree with us. I think we tend to very often spare us debates, that if somebody is not agreeing with us, we say, oh, this is not democratic, or is not on the right side of history, or is against human rights. If somebody tells you that he is against same-sex marriage, is it right away homophobic or not? Or can we? How do we try to convince that person? Or can we ask the question: is same-sex marriage the only way forward, or is it an indicator of equality between gays and heterosexuals? I mean, can we make up these debates or not? So I think we need to reinvent political fight and conviction, and if we want to, okay, let's go back to the grassroots, but not only to explain them what we want, but also to listen to them, and because also all this how to say, this progressive times when the progressives had more power, we were a bit spoiled. That I mean, I speak for NGO from NGO perspective, that it's easy. The task is to lobby the political power with expertise and materials, and the dependence was on funds and on donors. But these people were not accountable towards constituencies and the societies. And now, in the Hungarian case, when all the money is almost away, I mean, we really need to reinvent how to reconnect to society when there is no such direct way to policy, and that this technocratic solution, or technocratic idea, that there is a gender expertise, and there are the experts who know that normal people cannot. It should be left to the experts. It also depoliticized the issue, and that so we need ways to reinvent. And we have a very big difficulty in our context, that we have a more and more autocratic and repressive regime, and it limits the space of discussion because we feel this danger coming, and then we always repeat each other, yeah, but let's not have these internal discussions. Now we have the bigger danger, and we have to fight together. And I think we shouldn't limit us and have those debates, for instance, about whether market actors are helpful for us or not, how they are sitting on progressive causes and making their own gains out of it without furthering really the cause, or how we imagined liberal progress, and that it's not a linear way, and maybe we should rethink our concepts, how we want things forward. And maybe we can think about unusual alliances. Maybe it's not unusual, but connect to organizations, actors who are not feminist or who are not pro-gay in the first place, but who fight for issues like, in the Hungarian case, I could say the nurses movement, the trade unions, who fight now against the slave law, which will, this law on the supplementary hours that were extended recently, so that we try to look out of our progressive organizations bubble. It depends, of course, on the context. Trade unions could be also in our bubble, but to try to work with those. In Hungary, the most successful women's movement in the last years was the movement of the mothers of disabled children. So maybe we should learn from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther, on all of you for your very useful proposals and suggestions. And before I'm going to open the floor to the audience, I would like to benefit from the occasion, because we were talking about alliances and joining forces. I would like to mention an initiative that was taken here by the progressive forces within the European Parliament. It's the so-called All of Us campaign, All of Us platform, that was found actually in 2014 already by the Socialists and Democrats, together with ALDE, the Liberals in the European Parliament, Greens, and the European left. And we actually, this was actually a reaction to the growing restrictive anti-choice initiatives that of ultra conservatives and religious forces and organizations here. That was getting more and more visible also in the European politics. And so we are organizing since then on a regular basis activities, conferences here in the European Parliament. And I think this is also on issues, for instance, like sexual education, but also consensuous objection, rainbow families, access to contraception, and safe and legal abortion. And I think this is a very good example how we can join forces and really collaborate and have alliances throughout the progressive parties here and political groups here in the European Parliament, because I think this is what we need to do as well, really to join forces and become more visible and vocal when it comes to counter these developments, because they are very visible and very well organized as well. And so just to give you this idea. But now I would like to give the floor to you, of course, and see hands raising here. So I would like to ask you to be precise, short, and also maybe that you mention whom you're addressing to, whom you want to address your question.
First of all, I would like to see socialists and Democrats to create some kind of ideological academies. This is something that we want to do in Greece, but we didn't do it. And I believe that it would help a lot for the young socialists to know their roots and the purposes of social democracy, because nowadays we see that a lot of people don't know the history and the ideas that social democracy represents. The second one I want to say is that I would like to see a more radical program, a program closer to the old-fashioned one, like the Gotha program and all that. And the third one I want to say is that I believe that what David Easton used to say, that knowledge produces actions. That there are no values. There are always values in academics. So I believe that we should fund LGBTQI studies in every country, because, for example, in my country there are no studies like that, and it's very important. Also, Michel Foucault used to say that knowledge produces power, and the opposite. And the last one I want to say is that I believe that S&D should put supervisors. I've made a formal proposal via email. Should should have supervisors in every country to monitor what the politicians there that belong to the family are doing, because a lot of times we see, especially in South or Eastern countries, that politicians come here, say different things, and then they come back and do a whole other things, and this is you feel like they are making fun of you when you're in your country. Okay, so I would like to see a change in that. This is what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much for these comments, and probably you want to, or maybe you want to react, but I suggest that we just collect some questions. Please.
I'm Andy Vermouth from the organization Post Versa. I have a first question for Esther. If we want to overcome regression in women's rights, I think it starts with education, a topic like world citizenship, mutual understanding and equal rights, also citizens' education, with also a form of historic critique into the topic. What do you think about this idea, Esther? And then I have a question to David. Women are the biggest victims of the European austerity policies, and what is the socialist answer on that question? For Florian, that's your name, yes. I also have a question. I see a lot of people from the eastern countries, also from Russia, also from Ukraine, also from Poland, are used here in Europe, in other countries, in Belgium also, as low-cost jobs. A lot of these people work in the black market. They don't have any rights. For example, in Spain, we have a lot of migrants also working in the orange industry. They keep the people there, the migrants there. They are good. They can be used as low-cost jobs. And so also a lot of women are victim of because they are living in camps. So what could be the answer of Europe to stop this? And I still have another question to Irene. Irene, that's your name, eh? Okay. Because we are in a lux position here. We have a fantastic position here in Europe to talk about equal rights for women, but I think we also have to change the world and make links with the African feminist movements, because are we doing that? Are we making these links to have these equal rights in the African continent? But also a lot of people I know people who are from Taliban living here also in Europe, and they import actually a bit what they've seen in their education here in our system. So what would be your answer, and is there now a link? Are you working also to have a sort of progressive movement for equal rights in the African countries? Thank you.
Hi, I'd like to thank the whole panel. This is addressed to Catriona, picking kind of a question about an alternative. I think there is a growing trend of neoliberalism which is pretending to be feminism, and this celebrates multinational companies, personal gain, and individualistic empowerment. I went to a feminist conference in London, and someone said quite rightly, you always hear about self-care, but never about community care. So I was wondering, how do we attract people back to a collective action, like a collective movement for women's rights and liberation?
Hi, my name is Ruby Green. I am an economics and critical identity studies student from Beloit College in the United States, so my perspective is a very US-oriented one. But my question is, how do you think that we should deal with the fact that mainstream feminism is predominantly white feminism and fails to include women of color and often makes them choose between their gender and their race? And how will feminism shift its focus from equality to equity and implement policies that focus on intersectionality?
Hi, thank you for your speeches. So my question is going to be for Esther.
and it's also in relation to the individualization and fragmentation within feminist movements. So my question is rather regarding, like, what do you think, what is the relation between the individualization and internal fragmentation of social movements, and between what we talk about now as a backlash against feminism and women's rights issues, and also maybe in relation to how academia kind of thinks of feminism and like the increasing like intersectional focus that is of course very important, but risks like further fragmenting collective interests. Thank you.
I suggest we close for the first round now and give you the occasion to answer. I don't know if you want to. Okay. I think that was one question to Irene directly.
How lucky. I can start with the answers. Of course, we are definitely working with social justice, with gender equality in Africa. That's very, very close to the heart of IPPF, which is actually a global organization. So we have local members in every African countries, and women's rights is really at the heart of what we do. So we are having these linkages, and of course, actually, we are fighting for sexual and reproductive autonomy, for the empowerment of people all over the world. We did it, and we are doing it in Pakistan, we are doing it in Afghanistan, and of course we are doing it in Europe. And it doesn't matter where the oppressive or liberticide forces are coming. If they are coming from certain religions or other worldview, we will always fight them. So that's no doubt that for IPPF this is a major cause, and that we apply a human rights approach.
Thank you, Irene. There was a question, I think you mentioned Esther, but I guess it was Catriona, right? I want to take them.
Sure. So in terms of the forms of education, I think that we need to look at holistic reform of the education system in terms of overall, when I talk about rote learning, I think we see too many of the systems, no matter the subject, that are more around just rote learning and learning to listen to what the person is telling you instead of to think about it, to challenge it, to engage with it. So I think overall it's about the whole system of education. Also seeing in each country that there are programs specifically around, as you say, citizenship, politics, engagement, what it is to be a member of society, to be part of your local community, to be part of your national community, to be part of the international community. And I think as well, of course, that this links into what we talk about in terms of comprehensive sexuality education. And you look at the principles we need to see there that go beyond just the biological, and also talking about the kinds of relationships we have, but being able to start that from a very young age and base it in conversations that link to consent, but around how do we want to treat each other? How do we respect each other? How do we really put at the center of those conversations the well-being of other people around us? So again, it links back really strongly to this idea of individualism versus systemic analysis. So I think that leads into this question around within feminist communities, how we see this shifting and these two different groups that are having either a very systemic analysis or more of a kind of neoliberal individualistic focus that is quite often feeding into and fed by the capitalist system. And I think in terms of attracting people back to more of an analysis of what's going on affecting wider communities and how do we make really a holistic reform, it's looking at this intersectional approach. It's recognizing that intersectionality isn't about an individual person and, you know, who is tokenistically at the front, but how do our policies reflect the needs of all people? How do we bring more people throughout the process of a movement, of a project, of a campaign, of an organization? If we talk about inclusion of women of color, if you are speaking and you are only an all-white organization, how can you purport yourselves to be able to really adequately represent and reflect the needs of women of colour? But you can't invite a woman of colour into a space that isn't going to be welcoming, into a racist space. So we need to challenge ourselves within our own spaces to do better, to think more critically about what messages we're sending. And then I think if we can really do that, we will show that this systemic analysis is the one that has the impact for most people.
Thank you, Catriona. So, Esther,
I will try to answer your question. Yeah, sorry. I would like to connect it also to the former remark of how neoliberal feminism raised, or how empowerment and choice and freedom, so all these very important concepts were reinterpreted and now serve other goals. We see all this market of femvertising that feminism sells, and we know how these companies make women work in Bangladesh. Among which circumstances, so not very credible, but and I think this also contributed to so how these concepts have changed. We also, if we speak about choice, we shouldn't give up the concept, but at least we should be aware that it has been misused, and that very often we. And I think this part of the problem is that we stopped criticizing the economic system. We stopped criticizing the exploitations. It seems like we want that the 1% rules the world, or has, I don't know, 70% of the world wealth, but just 50% of them should be women. I mean, this is not a feminist goal for me. We should, and this is my understanding of intersectionality, that we should understand patriarchy and capitalism and how they intersect with each other, and not policing people that if he or she or they can't speak because of this and that position. So I think there is a shift from structural problems to individualized strategies or proposing of strategy or language. And this is maybe because we think that the scale is, we just cannot change the system. That many people escape in Hungary the state, I don't know, the healthcare system. They go to private. They escape the education system if they have the means, instead of making huge movements for the bettering of the education or healthcare system. So I think it is together and I think it is related to this neoliberal cooptation, and that is how I think the concept of intersectionality has also changed. And this, in our context, it's regularly the gender ideology, or this scapegoat gender ideology, is always accused of, I know what you want to say. You say that I cannot speak because I'm a cis heterosexual man. So I think we should tidy up on this field too. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. There are, I think, 2 more reactions from your side, but if we can have it short, and then we maybe can answer a few more questions from the audience.
So just briefly, I'm not going to answer about the austerity politics because I'm not the organizers, so I will let them do that if they want to. But what I wanted to say, I think the challenge, and it's both politically, for instance, with the All of Us campaign, or it's also the same among social movements, is how we can unite. Because I think on the one hand, for instance, progressive actors, or I don't like that term, but democratic actors unite together, because I think this is what is at stake, is how we defend democracy. But at the same time, agree that we disagree on certain things. So that would be my answer. For instance, the only point where I would disagree with what Esther said. I had a conversation a few days ago with British colleagues who were discussing whether gender is that, or whether it should be with the anti-trans feminism and the pro-trans feminism. I think it's just losing energy, because why we do that? And obviously opponents choose that topic on purpose the same way they have chosen surrogacy in France. They have chosen topics that would be divisive so that we fight each other instead of fighting them. And I think this is really how we should should be sometimes pragmatic, recognize we don't agree always, but still we have to work together, because this is the only thing we can do.
Just very quickly to the question posed about immigration from Eastern European countries and how many, especially women, are then caught up in a precarious job. In general, it has a lot to do with the imperfection of the European single market, because it's not a real single market, because there is not a real freedom of movement. So people of all types of qualifications do not freely move around those countries. And because there is a certain logic in this, that usually people in one economic space move from the economic periphery to the center where there are more jobs, that is a very contentious issue in politics in general. So like in Germany, in Brexit, we saw it with the Polish plumber, so to speak, and in Germany you have the same type of discussions. And an answer to that, in the end, it takes a lot of courage for any political party to make the working conditions of those people as a subject, because it's so contentious. So in the end, courage is the only solution. And of course, on the European level, to try everything, but I'm not an economist, and I'm certainly not an economic politician, to find an answer to how can the single market work better, because that is the root cause of why we have that type of situations.
Thank you. I think the interpreters will have to leave at 5:30. Is that true, or do you have? Are you no longer? Okay. No, we always also have to think of the of their working time, of course. No, that's good to know. So we can maybe open up for another round of questions for the last minutes before we go to the interpretation. Just to give you the floor as well, because you're the three of you here. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Oh, I think it's working. Okay. My question would be addressed to David and Esther mainly, but I would hope others will also react something. You touched the problem of capitalism and patriarchy heading into the bright future hand in hand, and how capitalism and patriarchy are embedded into each other. And I would like to ask you that. David was talking about that the situation is really detailed and really complex, and there isn't a single solution for our problem. But isn't capitalism is the sole problem we face right now? I mean, it is an economical and indirectly a social system which constantly creates the inequalities. And what do you think about tackling gender equality through tackling capitalism itself? And also, Esther is mentioning in her articles pretty often, but among this group, the Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, we don't want to go beyond capitalism. But if we take, for example, the Scandinavian welfare state, those countries avoid exploitation among their societies. Meanwhile, they exploit the South, for example, or the East. So you can't avoid exploitation if you're staying in the framework of capitalism. So I would like to have your opinions on this, if you would like to give yours. Thank you.
This is a very complex question, of course, but maybe I can invite you, those who really have a comment maybe to make and not a concrete question. There was one lady here, please. Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much. My name is Sarah King. I work in the Workers' Group Secretariat at the European Economic and Social Committee. Thanks very much for a very, very interesting panel, very thought-provoking. Agreed with a lot of what you said. Not everything, but a lot of it. Just a couple of things, aspects that for me were missing, but actually one of the lady over there actually raised one of them. But the first one was the issue about power and the dynamics to do with power in relation to gender and race and other forms of inequalities and discrimination, and how in the context of the backlash, I think that's one of the sort of key aspects as to what is happening. It's about power structures sort of fighting back to sort of preserve a status quo. So that was just one reflection. The other thing which I said the lady over there mentioned was in the context of the discussion about collectivism, which I think is extremely important, and the link with direct action, the role of trade unions. And, I know that there are a lot of criticisms that can be brought to the trade union movement for things that they have or haven't done. But I think when we're looking at, what institutions do we have to try to, how can I put it, to redress the balance of power and to sort of move forward in terms of collective action, solidarity, I think we can't overlook the role that trade unions have to play. And just finally, a point of information in relation to the work of the European Economic and Social Committee. In the context of the role of civil society, I think in Europe or the European Union, the ESC has a specific role as being the voice of European civil society. And I would say to people, if you don't already know about the committee, which probably you don't, have a look at the website, see who your national national members are and contact these people to ask them what they are doing on these sorts of issues. One of the things we are actually doing at the moment is we have an own initiative opinion, which basically means it's come as an initiative from one of our members, one of our female members, and it's an opinion on gender equality issues. And one of the issues that's raised in that opinion actually is the issue of the backlash and, you know, what we're seeing. And also, one of the things that we want to push for in there as well is the need to have, you know, a European strategy on gender equality issues. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I think we have to really come to an end here. I can take one more. Somebody who maybe wants to have a concrete comment on what has been said. Okay, please.
Okay, so I have a question relating to something that Ms. Kovac said, but it's a question for anyone really. I'd like to ask you to shortly elaborate on how we could. Okay, so you implore us to rethink or to deconstruct maybe the basic values of feminism of every such movement, but how that should be done without further creating division on an already weakened field. Thank you.
You very much for your very good ideas and thoughts. I would ask the panelists now to just shortly react maybe, and then we come to our conclusions.
Okay, just briefly, capitalism and patriarchy. I would say, I mean, there's some people who are saying anti-gender is the new strategy of neoliberalism or capitalism, what you comment. Historically, each time that different inequalities have been subordinating to class and to capitalism, they've never been solved. And that's true in the case of feminism, they get forgotten always. So I would rather think complex systems of inequalities that are interlocked and interact with each other instead of explaining everything by one system of inequalities. Then the other thing about, I mean, briefly, EU institutions and what it could be done, I would love the EU institutions to do something, although given the Commission we might have in a few months, I'm a bit skeptical because if we give too much power to the European Commission, it might be a nightmare in a few months. But then the other thing is really, I know some people have been trying to do things, vocally or not, and they couldn't, and they were blocked. And so my question is really just the example to close with. I was one of the academics coordinating the opposition to the ban on gender studies in Hungary. Emailed on behalf of everyone, leading officials in the Commission. I got a very nice letter first saying, we're watching carefully what's happening. So when it happened, I sent another email saying, what are you doing now? Well, I'm just waiting for the answer.
Okay, I don't have a short answer, but maybe we can continue later. But thank you very much for this. I think I don't think that what you raised or what I raised was that we want to explain everything by capitalism. It's just that they should be looked at together. And I really believe that without raising what all this exploitation around produced by the current forms of capitalisms, or I don't know how to call this, what we are having, I mean, without that, we will not solve gender equality. We can tell men to do more care work as much as we want, as long as the employer can tell the father that, hey, you don't want to lose the only secure job in the family, do you? So in our research, I told about earlier this how women in Hungary feel the labor market is really a very huge, it's not about work-life balance, it's a huge tension that it's contradictory, the way how the ideal employee is imagined and how the competitivity forces the company. So it's not about evil companies, what I am saying, it's that this is the systemic logic, this contradicts how we live lives and how we want to care for each other, and we need time for that. And it's not about, okay, let's only improve institutions so that we can put all our old people and children there. And that, I mean, so I think, and also the West-East thing, that's also one of my problems with the word progressive, that we sometimes think that there is a progress is possible at the same time for everyone. Although I think that progress is always, because of this logic, on the shoulders of others. So when we say that, oh, how good they were the 50s and the 60s, democracies, the social democracy in Western Europe, to which price was that welfare state, to which country? So I have to stop here now, but we can discuss it later. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Esther, for your short answer to a complex question.
So I think to try and wrap up, I think the questions around individualism, I think individualism can become very attractive because over the years, as we started to make some gains, we started to gain a little bit of power. And with that became an attraction and the possibility of some complacency. So I think we need to really hold ourselves to account and make sure that to us progress doesn't become a few privileged people being able to fit into I'll use patriarchy for shorthand, into a patriarchal system, into a traditional system of power inequality, but instead that we really work to dismantle that, we end that complacency, and we drive forward. We don't get distracted by these regressive voices, by these fundamentalist voices. Instead, we hold true to a vision, and that vision is based on hope.
Yeah, I want to quickly react to the point that you made when it comes to discussion and fractions within a movement, and also with what David said, like with the type of discussions that we want to have, and this agree to disagree kind of thing. I think it is very, very important that also not only on the inside but also on the outside, democratic forces, so to speak, show what democracy means. And that does not mean that we find a set of things and everybody adheres to, and if you say something different then you're out and you're a populist, but to show what healthy debate in that sense look like. And I would really disagree to say like that those kind of fractions weaken like the democratic movement. I think it's rather the other way around when it's done the right way. And of course there are various instances where you see people doing it the wrong way, but I think in general it's very, very important. That's also what I meant a little bit with this, for example, stylizing like that election now into, okay, they're the pure Europeans and they're the populists and the right-wingers. Like that is very, like this is very easily to exploit it, because like the message itself that one pro-European thing could do is already incorporated in the other narrative as a lie. So we can show by discussing things, by breaking up clarities, that we have a lively debate.
Thank you, Florian. And then the floor is to Irene Donadio. She's the senior lead for partnership and strategy at the IPPF.
Okay, I will try to go through the whole journey we did, and when I was given the task of doing the conclusion, so great, I don't have to do any presentation, but then I realized that in fact it's a big challenge, because the discussion was super rich, and I think it was very interesting. We went through discussing how feminism can be disruptive, how illiberal regimes are trying to undermine people's autonomy, and in particular women's rights, how we need to demystify what they are doing, and particularly identifying the type of different attacks that they do, and also understand the big complexity. I think that the first speakers, but also David and Florian and Esther spent a lot of time telling us what the traps are, what the wrong terminology would be, what the nuances are, and also in the first panel we saw that it's very hard to go binary. It's not only ultra-conservative, they are populists, it's not only ultra-conservative, they are anti-gender. We have anti-gender also within the socialist and the democratic movement, between very left-wing countries in many parts of the world. So we have to be very conscious about not oversimplifying, and the same, we had big discussion around partnership versus liberalism versus capitalism versus austerity versus exploitation in the labor market, and how the European Union was constructed, how the values have been built. That said, after spending so much time saying what the problems were and the challenges with the funding, shrinking space, predatory attacks on reproductive rights, sexual rights, women, violence on women, we finally went to some more constructive discussion, focusing on solutions. And then we had a lot of suggestions, particularly from Catriona Massey, who came out with a whole panoply of different things that we can do, refocusing the narratives, refocusing the public discussions around care, around the local communities, engaging with the local communities. That was something that was also said by David and by many others, that we have to go back to the grassroots. I couldn't agree more, and that's also something we are doing very much at IPPF, speaking to the communities, but also think beyond any academic wonderful analysis. Remember, people have to understand when we talk. So there is a lot of big blah blah discussions that we do around a lot of very complex, interesting, sexy topics that people don't understand, don't have a clue about. So there is a huge issue around messaging, looking at narratives that people really understand, because one thing we know is that the people who are working on the right-wing populist side are very strong on communication. They're strong on social media, they're strong on communication, they're strong on hitting certain fears. And of course, they build their narratives in a very smart way. They do research, they know what they're talking about, and they build something people want to hear. I also appreciate very much how much Elena and Esther pointed out that we have to be empathic and rational in this discussion, in the sense that you cannot label entire countries or a vast majority of public opinion in any given country as stupid, fascist, misogynist idiots, because that doesn't really take us very much forward. I would say that is valid also for my country. I'm sorry that Leah is gone. We certainly see predatory attacks that we have never seen before. And we have to be careful. Yes, it's partially fascism, but it's also something very new. On the other hand, we cannot go out and label everyone as a populist idiot, because that doesn't really work. And I think it was very interesting also how Marina addressed one of the questions around how you can demystify also the issue on placing feminists as the hate of the man or the attack against man. And that is translating into something real, something people can relate to, something people can understand. For example, she was talking about explaining gender through explaining the situation of women who have cancer and have to go to the hospital. That goes beyond the academic issue around is gender more gender identity or gender roles or LGBTI issues. Of course, we had a lot of weak spots. And our Bulgarian friend pointed out the fact that we use a word that in a lot of languages doesn't exist, and that can be so easily twisted into an insult or in a reducive vision of what gender is, being only transgender or LGBT, and how they can depict certain groups as the monsters. And they do for a reason. They do first research, they know what people are afraid about, and then they start dividing. And I really appreciated also what David said. We have to be aware of our differences, of our strategies, but we have to keep united, because they are very smart in dividing the different fronts, the feminists, the white feminists from the black feminists, the feminists from the LGBTI movement, or the trans movement, or the migrant woman. You know, they're playing with all of these identities issues, the nationalistic issues, the Islamophobic migrant issues. We have to be smarter, and certainly we have to be empathic and put aside the differences, go grassroots, share knowledge, and fight together. And that, for me, was maybe the most vibrant, more important conclusions of all these different discussions. And a lot of new concepts, like Marina coming with a human security prize. You know, a certain new way of framing stuff that people haven't think to make it concrete. Women dying because of the lack of support in the protection of women against violence. So there was a very rich discussion, and I'm sure you're very tired now. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, to all the panelists, to the audience for this very fruitful debate, and I think there have been lots of ideas coming up. I thank you very much also for the very good cooperation with FAPS, Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and Jean Jaurès Foundation, and I wish you all a very nice evening. Hope to see you soon.
It was excellent.
When somebody asks you a question, like, what is society? And you have women minute to respond to it.
Yeah.
Especially, I find it always really interesting having the mix of, activists, policy people, researchers, because you've just got so many perspectives.
It is.
I could focus on it.